You were always sensitive, my father laughed, and my brother mocked me at dinner. That night I walked out, then find 15 missed calls. I'm Ethan, I am 28 years old. And for the majority of my life, I've been a supporting figure in my own family. I'm not the golden kid or the favorite, I'm simply there, quietly doing the right thing and keeping my head down. I was the kid who got all B's and never asked for anything. The one who did not ruin anything, yell at the dinner table, wreck the car, or sneak off to parties. I assumed that would be sufficient. It was not. My elder brother Liam is the golden one. He always was. He's 30, and he goes through life as if it owes him something. My parents, particularly my father, regard him as an unstoppable force. The one who will carry the family name forward, whatever that means. Liam played varsity football, even though he mostly sat on the sideline, and it garnered him years of adulation. Meanwhile, I was discreetly teaching myself how to make websites, edit movies, and even write some code. I got my first freelancing employment when I was 19. Nobody said anything. Mom used to call me the silent achiever, but things changed when Liam dropped out of college and chose to establish his own business. They hailed him courageous for it. Dad co-signed the loan. When I sought to start my own side hustle, a true LLC with a few respectable clients, Dad advised me to wait until I had more experience. I moved away as soon as I could afford to. I wasn't rushing away. Not really. I simply needed space. I continued to return for birthdays, holidays, and other occasions. Even when it felt awkward, Liam found new ways to tease me, calling me the intern, laughing at my attire, and asking if I was still making money on YouTube. It wasn't just him though. My parents never intervened. They always let things slip. This year, things started to grow worse. I'm not sure why precisely. Maybe the tension was mounting. Perhaps something snapped in Liam. Or maybe I simply quit brushing things off. It began with small things. When I arrived at the residence, I'd find my seat at the table already taken. Nobody would ask whether I wanted coffee or assistance with the dishes. If Liam needed assistance moving a couch or putting up his new computer, I was suddenly essential again. Then I'd return to being invisible. The tipping point began a few weeks ago. It was Dad's birthday. Big backyard party, steaks on the grill, and the typical booze and bravado routine. I showed up with a kind present, custom-engraved cufflinks with his initials and a phrase from his favorite book. I figured maybe this time it will work. Maybe he'd see I cared in my own way. However, when he opened it, all he said was, "Huh, that's different," before placing them on the table and going on. Meanwhile, Liam arrived 45 minutes late with a box of Cuban cigars and received a standing ovation. That was nothing new to me, but what came next hurt much more. I was assisting Mom in bringing out dessert when Liam began relating a tale about how I sobbed in gym class back in middle school. Complete falsehood. Everyone laughed, including my parents. Nobody glanced at me. I stood there holding a platter of lemon squares like an idiot, cheeks flushed and jaw clenched. When I eventually set them down, Dad just chuckled and remarked, "You were always sensitive, Ethan." After that night, I determined to put some space between us. I ignored a couple of texts. I skipped one of the Friday meals. I needed air, I needed perspective, but it simply made everything worse. Mom called 3 days ago to guilt trip me. She inquired if I had forgotten I was a member of the family. She stated Liam was worried about me, which was ridiculous. When I didn't bite, she asked if I could come over for supper Friday night. Only the 4 of us. It would be good to catch up, she remarked. Reset. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I figured they might have missed me. Maybe things would be different. It was not. Dinner was awkward from the beginning. The meal was fine. Mom always prepared a good roast, but no one was talking. Liam was on his phone half the time, and Dad simply continued drinking his beer, looking between us like he was waiting for a performance to begin. I tried to keep things light, asking about Mom's garden and discussing a project I was working on. Blank gaze and groans. Liam responded, "Sounds like a lot of time to waste on something no one's ever going to see." I gently reminded him that I had a few clients who enjoyed my work, that I'd developed a fairly consistent income, and that I was even considering getting a larger space next year. That's when Dad smiled and asked, "So are you finally going to get a real job?" Something shattered in me. Then a faint crack, nothing too loud or spectacular. I set down my fork, moved my plate forward and asked, "Why do you even invite me if everything I do is just a joke to you?" Liam leaned in, his voice rising. "Because you need to hear the truth for once. You're the reason this family's falling apart." His words resonated across the dining room. Mom looked down at her plate. Dad did not skip a beat. He nodded slowly and continued. He's right. We'd all be better off without you. I didn't disagree. I did not weep. I just rose up, grabbed my coat and went out. It was dark when I returned to my flat. I didn't get much sleep. I kept reliving their remarks, wondering how we got here and how I ever thought I was a member of that family. I ignored every phone call and text message that night. Then arrived this morning. I awoke to 15 missed calls, all from the hospital. And now I'm torn between picking up the phone and letting them experience what it's like to walk away. I looked at my phone for a long time. Just gazed. 15 missed calls, all from the hospital. No names. The same generic caller ID kept repeating itself, like an alert I had missed. I did not feel afraid at first. It's just confusion. Dull bewilderment. The type you get when your body awakens before your intellect. I crawled out of bed, legs weary. My mind still repeating the night before. Mason's voice echoed, and Dad's words felt like cold in my chest. Then followed the texts from Mom, one after another. Ethan, please call me. Something has happened. It's your dad. That one landed differently. I did not react. Not straight away. I simply sat on the side of my bed, the sunshine streaming in through the blinds as if nothing had happened. But everything did. Because the fact is that I did not feel panicked. I felt nothing. That's when I understood how far they had pushed me. I'd always thought that no matter how awful things went, some basic part of me would still care and need them. But when I stared at my phone, all I felt was frigid remoteness. As if I were seeing a stranger's situation develop on someone else's television. I eventually made a call. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to know. A nurse responded, polite, professional, and detached. She said that my father had been in with chest discomfort and a suspected heart attack, stable presently, but under watch. They were attempting to contact family members in case something changed. I thanked her and hung up, but no part of me wanted to rush over. Instead, I sat in solitude, allowing the weight of it all to settle and the irony to flourish. We'd all be better off without you, he stated. His heart stopped beating less than 14 hours later when he was sleeping. I don't say this with animosity, but more as an observation, as if the cosmos has been listening. An hour later, another call. This time it was Liam. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief, clipped, and almost robotic. You should come. Dad is begging for you. That was new. Dad never asked for me. He never made it plain to me as an adult that he wanted me around. Not after I moved out. Not when I graduated. Not when I landed my first large customer and emailed him a film I was pleased with. But now when he's afraid and hooked up to a monitor, he recognizes my name. I did not go. Not that day. Instead, I cleaned my flat, washed the kitchen countertops, vacuumed under the sofa, and reorganized the wires behind my desk. I needed control over something. I needed to anchor myself in an environment where I wasn't invisible. By nightfall, Liam had made 4 more calls. Mom, twice. I did not respond to any of them. I turned off the phone and went for a stroll. Cold wind, deserted streets, my footfall reverberating through the silence. I reflected on how many years I'd spent bending myself to fit into a mold that they never made place for. How many holidays had I shown up out of guilt, only to leave feeling smaller than when I arrived. I recalled the platter of lemon squares I'd held as a peace offering, the laughing, the expression on Dad's face when he uttered it. We'd all do better without you. I'm not sure when it became typical for me to accept so little. The next morning I surrendered and went to the hospital. Not because I forgive him or miss them, but because I needed to see him. See, the man felt chopping me down would make him taller. I entered the clean white room expecting to feel anything. Rage, despair, and relief. But all I saw was a tired guy hooked up to machines, his eyes closed, and the lines around his lips tighter than I had recalled. Mom sat next to him, mascara streaked and hands gripped together as if a prayer had gone unanswered. Liam stood in the corner, arms folded and avoiding eye contact. When I entered, they both glanced up. Mom talked first. Thank you, Ethan, for coming. Liam didn't say anything, just nodded slightly. I did not sit down. I stood near the entrance, heart steady. After a lengthy silence, Dad opened his eyes, sluggish and unfocused. Then they landed on me. You came, Ethan, he croaked, his voice thin as smoke. I waited for something. An apology. A trace of regret. But all he said next was, I did not intend what I said. I wanted to believe it. I actually did. But after a lifetime of being second best, you begin to recognize hollow words before they touch the floor. I believe you did, I responded gently. You just didn't think it would echo back. He flinched slightly, but he didn't deny it. Mom stepped in. He wasn't thinking properly. Ethan, he was unhappy. Tired. You know how he gets when... I've known how he gets since I was 10 years old. And I interrupted him. No one talked after that. The heart monitor kept beeping steadily and slowly. I stayed 6 more minutes, maybe 7, before turning and leaving. That should have been the end of it, me walking out again, this time for good. But that night, something changed. It was late when I got home, nearly midnight, and I'd barely kicked off my shoes when I got a text from my cousin Olivia. We're not particularly close, but she's one of the few relatives who's always regarded me like a real human being, not just Liam's uncomfortable shadow. The text merely stated, "Hey, wanted to check on you. Heard what Liam did? That's screwed up." I blinked and reread it. What Liam did? I responded, "What do you mean?" 3 dots emerged and then disappeared. Then came the bomb. You didn't hear? He told people you refused to come to the hospital unless Dad promised to include you in the will. My stomach dropped, so I called her right away. She picked up quickly, her voice hushed but urgent. I was at Aunt Caroline's, and she said Liam was there, telling everyone you were blackmailing your way back into the family. He made it sound like he was threatening them, and he said you were only visiting Dad for money. I couldn't breathe, not because I was surprised Liam lied, but because everyone believed it so easily. I hadn't said anything about money, and I didn't want anything from them. But Liam knew exactly how to twist the knife. He knew I wasn't there to defend myself, and he knew how to turn my silence into a motive. Olivia kept talking, and he said, "You've always been jealous that you resented him for being successful." I laughed bitterly. Successful? He's living off loans Dad co-signed, whereas I have a business, clients, and my own bills. I know, she said. But you know how it is. They all eat up whatever Liam says. He's the good one. Always has been. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from fury. A slow, cold kind of fury. The kind that creeps into your spine and whispers, "Enough is enough." That night, I didn't sleep. I pulled out my old hard drive, the one I hadn't touched in months, and started organizing files, contracts, invoices, screenshots, video backups, every bit of proof I had that I built Eva. He didn't realize I'd been documenting things for years. Old texts, passive-aggressive emails, voice memos from phone calls I'd recorded when I suspected he'd twist my words. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared because people like Liam don't stop unless someone makes them. By sunrise I had everything in order, but the real twist came that afternoon. I received another call from the hospital, this time from the billing department. "Hello, is this Ethan Reynolds?" the voice inquired. "Yes. This is merely a courtesy call about the card you gave for your father's operation. We needed to check the allegations before proceeding." My thoughts blanked. "I didn't submit a card." The lady stopped. "It's listed under your name. The same address as the one we have on file for the emergency contact." I asked her to read it out. It was my old address, where I used to live before Liam moved in after I left. My jaw clenched. "Don't process anything," I whispered. "That card is not authorized." I hung up, and I knew he used my name, my identity, to pay for Dad's hospital bills, probably to look like a hero, and maybe even to make me look guilty if it came out later. I sat there, heart pounding, as the pieces fell into place. The lie about the will, the smear campaign, the fraudulent charge. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was war, and Liam had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I don't remember the exact moment I hit rock bottom. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. No shouting, no tears, but rather a slow, silent sinking, like waking up underwater, realizing you'd been drowning for a while, and wondering if swimming was even worth it anymore. After that call from the hospital billing department, I didn't yell or punch a wall. Instead, I sat in my chair, staring at nothing as the weight of it all settled in. Liam had used my name, my identity to cover a hospital bill, and he'd done so casually, as if it were just another tool in his arsenal. The betrayal hit me differently this time. It wasn't just words or cold shoulders over dinner. It was calculated, personal, a theft of both money and narrative, and it hurt. He'd twist the story later, perhaps to say I offered to pay, or that I tried to buy my way back into the family. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because it confirmed something I tried so hard not to believe. They didn't just fail to see me. They chose not to. When I called the hospital back and told them the charge was unauthorized, they were polite but unhelpful, saying I'd have to file a fraud claim with my bank and that they couldn't remove the card unless someone else took financial responsibility. I asked who added my card in the first place, and they said it had been provided during intake, and the form was signed by an Ethan Reynolds. I asked for a copy and they said they'd send it by mail. I could already see it in my head, Liam's handwriting or a sloppy attempt at copying mine. But seeing it wasn't what scared me. What scared me was how normal it all felt, as if I was used to being violated by my own family. That night, I walked, just walked, with no destination in mind, my legs moving block after block as if trying to outrun the thoughts in my head. The sky was overcast. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but I felt hollow, absolutely gutted. The next few days passed in a fog. I didn't work, I didn't sleep, and I ignored texts and phone calls. Liam had messaged me once with a smug line like, "Just cleaning up your mess, little bro. You're welcome." I couldn't respond. I didn't trust myself to say something I wouldn't regret. Mom texted as well, saying they were worried about me, that Dad was home now recovering and that we should put things behind us and come together. I almost laughed when I read that, as if we were a sitcom family arguing over Thanksgiving turkey, not a broken house held together by manipulation and selective memory. Then came the mail. The hospital's intake form. The signature wasn't even near to mine. It was hilarious, with big looping letters attempting to resemble my writing but full of irregularities, sloppy, hasty, and apparent. Liam didn't even bother to conceal it, he expected me to roll over as he usually did. I opened a new folder on my desktop labeled Truth and began building every email, voicemail, screenshot of Liam's texts, receipt showing my real address, actual bank information, and business activity. I pulled copies of my LLC filings from years ago, proof that I wasn't freeloading, jealous, or still figuring things out. For the first time in my life, I stopped editing myself for them, stopped shrinking to fit into the version of myself that made them comfortable, and began writing my story, not a Reddit post or a letter. I found old photos from family dinners where Liam would crop me out before posting them online, from parties where I was always behind the camera, never in front of it. I wrote down everything. The comments, the lies, the quiet betrayals, the gaslighting. I didn't intend to share it. I just needed to see it to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I had lived through it and survived. Somewhere in the middle of that process, I began to remember who I was before all of this. Before Liam's voice became the one that rewrote every room we entered. Before Dad's silence swallowed every opportunity to speak up. I remembered being proud of myself when I landed my first client. When I finished a 3-month video project that helped a small business triple their traffic, I remembered waking up excited to work rather than drained from carrying invisible wounds. I contacted an old client whom I had assisted in rebranding their company last year. We hadn't spoken in months, so I asked if they needed any video work done. They said yes, and within a day I was back in the zone, editing clips, selecting music and syncing transitions. My mind felt clear for the first time in weeks. I worked late into the night, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. One gig turned into 2, then a referral, then another. I didn't advertise or post anything online, but something had changed. The more I focused on myself, on building rather than reacting, the more momentum I gathered. And the more I worked, the more I realized how much my family had shrunk me. I started going to the gym again, nothing fancy, just a few light sessions a week to get my body moving. I used to second-guess myself, worried that I was being overly sensitive or making things about me, but the truth was that they made it about me when it was convenient, when they needed someone to blame, or when they needed someone to pay the bill. I changed my diet, started sleeping better, cleared out my apartment, donated old clothes, rearranged furniture, and threw out junk I didn't even remember owning. It felt symbolic, like shedding skin. I even booked a weekend trip to a small cabin upstate with no Wi-Fi or noise. I brought books, not screens. I hiked, journaled, sat in silence and listened to the wind, and somewhere out there, surrounded by trees and sky, I realized something important. I don't need them. I don't need their validation, permission, or even their love, at least not the kind they're capable of giving. What I needed was myself, my voice, my story, my strength. When I returned from that trip, I realized that Liam wasn't just a bully. He was a coward in a loud costume, a fragile ego dressed in bravado. Dad wasn't a patriarch. He was a man who picked favorites and called it discipline. Mom wasn't innocent. Her silence was a choice, and her refusal to stand up for me had consequences, whether she admitted it or not. But I wasn't going to chase an apology anymore. Instead, I was going to show them who they were attempting to erase. I started small, updating my portfolio, rebranding my website, polishing my client testimonials, adding new services, and then launching a YouTube channel, not for fame, but as a creative outlet, with tutorials, breakdowns of editing techniques, and behind-the-scenes project commentary. Within a week, a few videos began to gain traction. Comments began to trickle in, then more. One video reached 12,000 views, then 60,000 views. Emails followed. New clients. Collaborations. I was creating something real, something mine. But here's the thing. I didn't tell anyone, not even Olivia. I wanted this to grow in silence, free of their reach, untouched by their narratives. But the universe has a funny way of delivering news. One night, about a month after that hospital incident, I received another message from Liam, short, smug. Heard you're doing YouTube now. Cute. No congratulations. No curiosity, just condescension. But here's what he didn't know. I'd trademarked my brand and secured contracts. I'd filed paperwork. I'd grown stronger in the silence. And he still thought I was the same person who would shrink when challenged. He didn't realize I was no longer playing defense. I was building an offense. And if he tried to interfere, I'd be ready, because rebuilding is quiet. It's quiet, intentional, relentless, and eventually unstoppable. I didn't set out to get revenge. For weeks after I started rebuilding my business and re-entering myself, all I wanted was peace and silence. A life where my name wasn't dragged into lies. Where my accomplishments weren't used as punchlines. And where I could wake up every day knowing no one could take credit for what I'd built. But sometimes, especially when you've been used and discarded for years, peace can only come after justice, and justice doesn't show up by accident. It began with the credit fraud, which Liam used my name and old address to slap on Dad's hospital bills. I'd already filed a report with my bank and was working with them to investigate the charge, but I needed more. That's when I remembered something. A year ago, before Liam moved in, I installed a small security camera above the door. It wasn't a high-end system, just a basic motion-activated camera that uploaded footage to a cloud account I hadn't accessed in months. I'd installed it after someone stole a package, but when I moved out I forgot to take it down. It wasn't connected to Wi-Fi anymore, but I remembered that it had an SD card, and I knew Liam didn't notice things that weren't about him, so the camera was probably still there, dead and dusty but still storing data. The next morning I drove by the old place, parked across the street and just watched for a while. Liam's truck was there, with the same vanity plate. M4 Son, as subtle as ever, and there was no sign he was home. I waited until he left, probably to the gym or to brag somewhere, and then I made my move. The camera was still there, hidden in the porch light housing, exactly where I'd left it. I popped it open, yanked the SD card, and dashed away. When I got home, I dug out an old adapter and plugged the card into my laptop. The majority of the footage was old, with me grabbing takeout, the landlord fixing a leak, and a raccoon doing unspeakable things to a trash can. But then I came across the one. It was 4 weeks ago, and the timestamp was 2 hours after Dad was admitted to the hospital. I saved the video, backed it up 5 times, and uploaded it to my truth folder. It didn't show Liam signing the form, but it did place him at the address associated with the fraudulent hospital charge, and most importantly, it proved I wasn't there. After completing step 1, I contacted Olivia. I hadn't told her much since the last time she messaged me about Liam's smear campaign, but I figured if anyone in the family would be open to hearing the truth, it would be her. I sent her the video and asked, "Do you think anyone in the family would believe this matters?" She immediately phoned me. "Oh my goodness, Ethan," she replied. This confirms he's lying." I described everything, the charge, the signature, the voicemail, Liam's text, and the video evidence. Her voice was low and weak. "I knew he was evil," she murmured. "But this is next level. This is criminal." The word hung in the air. Criminal. It was no longer simply family turmoil. It was legal. Olivia didn't hesitate. "You need to do something with this. Expose him. Go public. Inform the family. Call the police. Whatever it takes." I wasn't ready to go full nuclear yet, not until I had everything in order. But I assured her I had a plan, which I did, since Liam's most powerful weapon was story. Before I could burn his bridge, I had to rebuild mine. I began by writing a letter. Not a rant, not a revenge post, but a letter to every extended family member who had been fed Liam's lies. I told Aunt Caroline, Uncle Thomas, Cousin Olivia, and even Grandma Helen, everything calmly, clearly, and factually, including screenshots, timelines, camera footage, proof of the forged signature, and the fraudulent hospital charge. I explained how Liam used my name and framed it as if I demanded inheritance money. And I didn't beg for sympathy. I just laid out the facts, and then I asked one simple question. If someone can lie so easily about their own brother, what else have they lied about? Olivia assisted me in sending it, some via email, others printed and mailed, and then we waited. For a few days nothing happened. Radio silence. I figured most of them had either ignored it or sided with Liam as they always did. But then Grandma Helen called, which might not seem like a big deal, but in our family, it was. Grandma Helen was the matriarch, the spine, the only person Dad still listened to. She'd never been warm toward me, more polite than loving, but she was sharp, observant, and had always believed Liam's stories until now. Her voice on the phone was low and forceful. I read your letter, Ethan. I didn't know what to say. I believe you, she said, which nearly shocked me. I don't know what happened to your brother, she continued. It's spiteful, and I will not accept it. She didn't say anything further, but it was sufficient. Aunt Caroline messaged me, saying she'd always suspected Liam had twisted tendencies and that my letter just confirmed it. Uncle Thomas texted, asking for copies of the hospital documents. And Olivia, who used to call me boring Ethan, sent a DM that said, "Wow, I had no idea. I'm sorry for laughing at such jokes. I didn't know it was like this." I didn't need their sympathy, but I did need their eyes. And now that they were open, I took the next step. I set up a private Zoom call, not for drama or argument, but to let the truth be seen. I invited everyone who had responded positively, and I walked them through the evidence calmly and professionally, like a client pitch. I showed the video, the text messages, the hospital invoice, and even the voicemail Liam left me, where he said, "Just cleaning up your mess, little bro." When the call ended, there was silence, and then Grandma Helen said, "This family deserves better." I didn't say it out loud, but I thought I do too. Olivia contacted me after the call. "You're scaring him," she said. I stared. "What, Liam?" she continued. "He's messaging people, freaking out, claiming you're trying to ruin his life, that you're obsessed with him." I nearly laughed. Of course he was playing the victim, but I wasn't finished because Liam hadn't just lied. He tried to call me once and I let it ring. I had already spoken with a detective, shared the documents, footage, and timeline, and they were looking into it. I didn't know how far it would go, but I knew it wasn't going away, and that scared Liam more than anything. Then another message appeared. "Please don't do this." I stared at it for a long time, the irony not lost on me. Please don't do this. As if I hadn't spent my entire life begging them to stop. But the real turning point came a week later when Dad called. Not Mom, not Olivia. Dad. I didn't answer, and he left a voicemail. "Ethan, I'm not sure what's going on between you and Liam. Your mother claims it's gotten out of hand. I'd love a chance to discuss face to face." I didn't call back. Instead I turned there, not out of compliance but out of strength, because I wanted him to see me. Not the picture Liam painted. Not the quiet achiever. Not the scapegoat. Me. And as I pulled up to that house, his house, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of the reckoning, and I had all the pieces in place. When I pulled into my parents' driveway that afternoon, I didn't feel nervous, which surprised me because this house had always made my stomach knot before I even stepped out of the car. Today, there was no fear, no anger, just a steady calm, as if I'd already crossed some invisible line and there was no going back. Dad opened the door himself and he looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, older. The hospital scare had taken something out of him that pride couldn't fully mask. For a brief moment, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered his voice at the dinner table, how he'd said we'd all be better off without me, and the feeling passed. "Ethan," he said, clearing his throat. "Come in." Liam was already there, pacing the living room like a caged animal. He stopped when he saw me. His face hardened, then shifted into something defensive, almost desperate. "So this is it," he snapped. "Are you gonna flaunt your little slideshow for Dad too?" I didn't answer. I dropped my laptop bag down on the dining table and sat quietly, methodically. The way people do when they know they have an advantage. Mom remained near the kitchen, eyes darting between us, hands wringing the edge of her sweater. She appeared exhausted and guilty, as if she had waited too long to choose a side and realized too late that neutrality was a decision in and of itself. Dad motioned for Liam to sit, and he didn't say anything. "Explain why the family is being dragged into this," Dad said to me. I nodded, opened my laptop and turned it so everyone could see. "But first, I want to be clear. I did not bring the family into anything. Liam did." "I'm just finished covering for that," Liam scoffed. "Unbelievable. You've always been theatrical." I pushed play, and the surveillance tape filled the screen, showing Liam in a hoodie walking out of the old home with the clipboard, the timestamp and address obvious. Dad leaned closer. Mom covered her lips. "What is this?" Dad asked slowly. "This," I said. "Is Liam leaving the address associated with the hospital intake form? The same address used when my name and card were fraudulently attached to your medical bills." Liam laughed, sharp and forced. "That doesn't prove anything." I clicked to the next file, the intake form, the signature enlarged side by side with my genuine one. "Forgery," I continued. "Ask any handwriting analyzer." Liam's chuckle faded. I then played the voicemail. "Just cleaning up your mess, little bro." "You're welcome." Silence filled the room and Mom sat down hard on a chair. Dad's face turned pale, then hot, and then pale again. Liam opened his mouth, then closed it. "I didn't," he began. I raised my hand. "I'm not done." I showed them the text messages in which Liam told people I'd demanded money. The screenshots Olivia had forwarded of family group chats in which my name was dragged through the dirt while I remained silent. The bank correspondence, the fraud report, and the detective's email confirming the investigation. When I finally closed the laptop, the house felt different, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Dad stared at Liam, not with pride or indulgence, but with amazement. "You used your brother's identity," he said quietly. "You committed fraud," Liam shouted. "I was assisting, you were at the hospital. Someone needed to take care of it. Ethan never does anything for this family." That was it, his final card, and I stood up. "I've spent my whole life doing things for this family," I said, my voice steady. "I simply didn't do them loudly enough for you. I didn't lie, steal, or step on others to be important, and you despise me for it." I looked to Dad. "You taught him that," I said. "Every time you laughed at his jokes about me. You didn't merely select a favorite when you dubbed my work a pastime or remained silent while he tormented me. You built a monster and called it leadership." Dad was unable to answer, and Mom began silently weeping. "I didn't know," she muttered. I glanced at her. "You knew enough." Liam took a step toward me. "Do you believe you've won?" he hissed. "You think this would make you better?" I met his eyes. "No. It makes me free." 3 days later, the police arrived at the house, not for me, but for Liam. Fraud charges, identity theft, and document falsification. The detective was polite but firm. Liam tried to argue, spin, and blame me, but it didn't work. Evidence doesn't care about charm. The family fallout was immediate and brutal. Aunt Caroline stopped answering Liam's calls, and Uncle Thomas demanded repayment for money Liam borrowed years ago under false pretenses. Grandma Helen rewrote her will, but not dramatically. She simply removed Liam as executive and reassigned responsibilities to a neutral third party. Dad didn't speak to Liam for weeks, and when he did, he offered disappointment rather than forgiveness, which hurt Liam more than any punishment could. As for me, I walked away with closure, not anger or silence. I refused to be the glue that held together a structure built on lies, so I kept my distance and focused on my work. My channel grew, my business doubled, and I moved into a new place that was bigger, brighter, and entirely mine. Months later, Dad called to apologize. I accepted it without reopening the door. Mom sends occasional messages. They're careful now, measured, respectful. Liam, last I heard, is still telling people his brother ruined his life. Perhaps he believes that. But here's the truth. I didn't ruin anything. I simply stopped allowing myself to be the family's scapegoat. And when I ultimately walked away, I didn't retaliate with yelling or harshness, but with the truth, which strangely enough, doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. My sister called me an embarrassment at her wedding. Later, her boss said, "Interesting," and handed me a contract worth $220,000, while she stood frozen. When Isabel was dragging me across the marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom, her fingers dug into my forearm. This occurred while she was dragging me. A total of $20,000 was required to purchase her wedding attire. Because I had successfully negotiated a reduction in the final price from $24,000, I was aware of this result. The smile that she wore was disproportionately wide and pointed. This was the kind of look that suggested that someone was about to burst into tears. She yelled out, "Mr. Harrington," and her voice was loud enough to be heard over the jazz quartet, as well as the champagne-fueled conversation that was accompanying the conversation. "I absolutely need you to meet someone very special." A halt was placed on the conversations that were taking place in the vicinity of us. When everyone looked at me, I felt a weakening in my stomach. David Harrington, who was 55 years old and the vice president of operations at Parkview Financial Group, was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that was probably more expensive than the monthly rent that I pay. Harrington was wearing the suit. It was necessary for him to travel all the way from Boston to be present at Isabel's wedding, in order to be there. Over the course of the past 2 years, she had been working as his executive assistant, and she never stopped gushing about how important he was and how prestigious her position was. When Isabel made the announcement, she said, "This is my brother Ethan," and her voice was filled with the emotion that comes with performing effectively. Our family was made to feel ashamed as a result of the comments, which struck their target like a punch to the body. Because of the heat, my neck started to swell. She laughed to herself in private. High, cruel, and practiced. Still single at the age of 40, still engaging in some insignificant consulting business that nobody comprehends. The gesture was so inconsequential that it was devastating, and she shrugged her shoulders. There are some people who never seem to figure out what they want out of life. The laughter came from my father, who was sitting at the head table. Approximately 10 years ago, we gradually stopped expecting a lot from Ethan. By covering her mouth and laughing, my mother gave the impression that Isabel had just told her the most hilarious joke she had ever heard. There are some individuals who are unable to determine what they want to do with their lives at any point in their lives. At the very least, we have one child who is successful. I stood there motionless. I could feel my hands shaking at my sides. 40 years of remaining unnoticed, of being the quiet one who took care of everything while Isabel took credit for its accomplishments. After that, she was humiliated in front of everyone at her wedding. The wedding that I had almost completely planned. That being said, Mr. Harrington did not laugh. Perfectly still, he sat there. Halfway to his mouth, he reached for a champagne flute. There was a brief moment when his gaze shifted from Isabel to my parents, and then it returned to me. The expression on his face was so unreadable that it appeared to be carved out of granite. He whispered, "Ethan." His name. It was a complete and total silence. I was wondering what kind of consulting you do. I was taken aback by the fact that he was even addressing me, and I blinked. In addition to providing services in corporate restructuring, I also offer financial consulting. During times of crisis, I provide assistance to businesses that are small to medium in size. I was wondering how long you've been doing this. I am 15 years old. He gave a slow nod and returned his champagne to the table without taking a sip. Very interesting. Now he was looking at Isabel. As if water were passing through shattered glass, all of the warmth emanated from his face. "Isabel, I ask that you come to my office first thing on Monday morning. I need to see you. At 8 o'clock. Precise. Try not to be late." He stood up, made some adjustments to his cufflinks, and then proceeded to walk in the direction of the exit without uttering a single word. It was suffocating due to the silence. An expression of bewilderment appeared on Isabel's face as her smile wavered. Both of my parents looked at each other, with my father's forehead furrowed and my mother's mouth hanging slightly open. Nobody was able to comprehend what had just taken place. I never did either. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel as I drove home to my small house on the outskirts of Riverside. 20 minutes later, I excused myself from the meeting, claiming that I was suffering from a headache. I was the one who kept to myself, the one who did not require attention, the one who chose not to demand praise, and the one who simply took care of things while everyone else was in the spotlight. Even though Isabel was 4 years younger than her, she had always been the center of attention. In addition to being the homecoming queen and the leader of the drama club, she was also the recipient of a full scholarship to attend Boston University. For as long as I could remember, I had been the son who was considered to be invisible. Isabel at her graduation, Isabel on her first day at Parkview Financial, Isabel receiving an award from the Chamber of Commerce, my own college degree, which I had earned while working 3 jobs, and a congratulations card that my mother forgot to sign. All of these images were taken by Isabel. The request for small favors had been made by Isabel, who had called 3 months prior to the wedding. The picture of her was displayed in each and every room of the house that my parents had decorated. Ethan, I need you to handle a few vendor issues because you are good at boring logistics stuff. I need you to handle their problems. I was able to negotiate with 14 different vendors, compare quotes, catch a catering company that was trying to charge for services that they hadn't provided, and catch the florist who was trying to upcharge by $900. All of these things were necessary because of the few vendor issues that I encountered. The venue contract was renegotiated by me, which resulted in a savings of $4,500 for her on the deposit. For the purpose of securing the photographer, I made a payment of $3,500 2 weeks before the wedding, because she had forgotten her checkbook. Her assurance was that she would repay me without delay. It was never done by her. She received unending praise from my parents. Isabel is extremely well organized. She is doing a wonderful job of managing this wedding and is very professional. My name was never mentioned by them at any point. When I arrived at the reception, I was seated at table 15, which was tucked away in the back corner close to the kitchen doors. I was surrounded by distant cousins that I had only met a couple of times. When I arrived at my office on Monday morning, which was a modest suite in a professional building that I shared with an insurance agent and a certified public accountant, I found a black Mercedes S-Class parked in the parking lot. I was surprised to see the vehicle there. My parents and Daniel's family were also present at the head table, where Isabel was seated with her new husband Daniel, as well as my parents. I was a placeholder, an afterthought, and the source of embarrassment and humiliation. David Harrington emerged from the building carrying a portfolio made of leather. He had a solemn expression on his face as he made his way out. There was a blue suit that he was wearing. In the course of his approach to me, he approached me and asked, "Grant, do you have any time to talk?" The office was unassuming but professional, with a tidy desk, filing cabinets, and framed certificates hanging on the wall. The state universities awarded me a bachelor's degree in economics, Northeastern University awarded me a master's degree in business administration, and I had 15 years of client testimonials under my belt. "Are you familiar with a furniture company that was operating approximately 14 years ago?" David Harrington said, looking around with what appeared to be real admiration. He asked me as he was sitting across from my desk. "Reed Furniture in Hartford." The name hit me like a freight train. I remember. The owner was an older man, possibly in his late 40s, who was on the verge of losing everything. That was me. He placed the portfolio on my desk. When I was drowning in debt 14 years ago, my father had just passed away, leaving me with a business that was hemorrhaging money. I was 3 weeks away from filing for bankruptcy. Then a young man walked into my store, looked at my books without charging me a dime, and told me exactly what I was doing wrong. My throat tightened as he said, "You spent 7 weeks working completely free." After a brief pause he said, "When I tried to pay you, you said that you couldn't take money from someone who reminded you of your grandfather. You saved my business, Ethan." After 4 years, I sold the store for a profit that allowed me to graduate with a master's degree and grow my profession. It was a complete stranger who decided to assist me when he had no motive to do so, and that is how all I have done began. I'd forgotten about Reed Furniture. It had been one of my first clients when I was just starting out, still idealistic, still thinking hard work and helping people would earn me respect. "When your sister introduced you at the wedding," Harrington continued, "when she called you the embarrassment of the family, I recognized your name immediately." At that precise moment, he opened the portfolio and uttered the words, "Ethan Grant, the man who saved my life." I did not fire Isabel as a result of the statements that she made on Saturday night. For the past 10 months, I have been researching her and gathering information about her. It has been brought to our attention that she has been fabricating expense reports, taking credit for work that junior associates have already completed, and using business email for engaging in questionable personal activities. Someone strewn documents across my desk, including spreadsheets, printouts from emails, and highlighted sections that revealed irregularities in the hours that were reported, fabricated client meetings, and costs that were attributed to the company for personal things. The wedding not only confirmed something that I already knew about her personality, but it also confirmed something else. According to Harrington, the pattern was discovered 7 months ago by Lindsay Evans, who has worked in corporate forensic accounting for 24 years. Evans is credited with first discovering the pattern. The assertion was made that Isabel had successfully negotiated a contract with Patterson Industries during the course of the negotiations. In all honesty, Adam Foster, a junior analyst, was the one who was in charge of negotiating the deal. Additionally, Isabel accepted the commission and added her name to the final papers. Both of these actions were taken by Isabel. $50,000 in total amount. The papers were the sole focus of my attention. An additional factor to take into consideration is the fact that she has been writing off her personal expenses as business expenses. Over the course of 20 months, she made more than $85,000 in fraudulent charges. These charges included subscriptions to gyms, apparel, and a trip to Turks and Caicos that she claimed was for the purpose of client development. Why are you telling me this? Our subsidiary companies are currently undergoing a process of reorganization as a result of the fact that I have appointed you to the position of consultant. There is a total of $45 million in revenue generated by 3 different companies. At that precise moment, he slipped a contract across the desk and said, "I need someone I can trust, someone with integrity." He then proceeded to say, 6-month project, $220,000. I was completely speechless. Harrington continued, "There's one more thing." While he was very careful with the words he chose to use. As the investigation progressed, Lindsay became aware of peculiar patterns in Isabel's personal finances, including significant transfers made from accounts that were shared with your respective parents. It was during this time that Lindsay observed these patterns. If I were you, I would investigate any family financial arrangements with extreme caution. I would like to make sure that you are not taken advantage of. During the following week, I devoted my time to searching through old documents. These included bank statements that I had saved from my time as an undergraduate student, letters that my grandfather had written to me before he passed away, and eventually, the truth. When my grandfather passed away 17 years ago, the school fund that he had established had a total of $100,000 in it. He had established the fund. The will stipulated that it would be divided equally between his 2 grandchildren, with each of them receiving a sum of $50,000. It was verified that Isabel had received her agreed-upon payment in full. The money that she received was sufficient to cover the entirety of her college education, as well as the purchase of her first automobile and her apartment in Boston. My parents had invested their money in a business venture that was not successful, and I had a portion of the investment in the company before it failed. They chose not to reveal this information to me at any point. The only reason I had college debts was because they had stolen my inheritance, and I had spent the previous 12 years paying them off. I had no other reason for having loans. It was clear from the records that the bank had kept. After withdrawing $50,000 from my account, my father transferred the money to Isabel's account 4 months later. This occurred after he had taken the money out of my account. She graduated without any outstanding student loans, while I was working 3 jobs and eating ramen for dinner 6 nights a week. She had graduated without any student loans. My eyesight became blurry as I sat in my office, doing nothing but staring at the paperwork until it became out of focus. 2 weeks after the wedding, Isabel called me on the phone expressing her happiness. Her voice was soft and pleading, which was a stark contrast to the cruel treatment she received at the reception. "Ethan, we need to talk. This thing with Mr. Harrington, it's a misunderstanding. You know how these corporate investigations blow things out of proportion. Do I? Just tell them you helped me with some of those reports that we collaborated. We're family, Ethan. Family protects each other. You called me the embarrassment of the family in front of 100 people. That was a joke. God, you're so sensitive. I was just trying to be funny. Funny. Look, if you don't help me, this could destroy my entire career. They're talking about criminal charges, Ethan. I could go to prison. You committed fraud, Isabel, because I was under so much pressure. Do you have any idea how stressful my job is? I made mistakes. That's all, mistakes. But if you tell them we worked together, I'm not going to lie for you. You owe me." Her tone became harsh, and the mask began to fall apart. "I let you be part of my wedding. I introduced you to important people. You owe me." I hung up the phone. After a period of 3 days, David Harrington personally summoned me to a conference room located within the regional office of Parkview Financial Group. In addition to him, he was accompanied by Lindsay Evans, who was in her mid-50s, had silver hair, sharp eyes, and was wearing designer glasses. Andrew Miles, who was in his late 40s and was the director of legal affairs for the company, had the exhausted expression of someone who had seen too many cases similar to this one. Lindsay said, "We found something else," as she moved a folder across the conference table across the table. "During the forensic audit, we discovered emails in Isabel's sent folder that appeared to come from your email address." The pit of my stomach sank. Instantaneously, Andrew stated, "They are not genuine. It was designed to give the impression that you were providing her with guidance on how to manipulate expense reports and client documentation. It was her intention to make you appear to be a co-conspirator. The emails were displayed to me by Lindsay as she opened her laptop. Their email address was very similar to mine, but they used a domain that was slightly different from mine. They had my name. Detailed instructions on how to falsify reports and how to claim credit for the work of others were included in the content, which was extremely damaging. The metadata is what tells the real story, Lindsay reiterated further. Every single one of these emails was created from Isabel's work computer. The IP address traces back to her desk. The timestamps show they were all created in a 3-hour window last Tuesday night. After she knew we were investigating, she tried to frame you. Andrew concluded by saying, if this had worked, you'd be facing criminal charges alongside her. I was unable to take a breath. In an effort to protect herself, my own sister had attempted to destroy me. This particular hearing for the company took place on a Friday afternoon. Despite the fact that I was not required to be present, Harrington extended an invitation to observe from a room adjacent to the one that had one-way glass. Within the group of 4 executives, Isabel was seated across from them. There is a woman named Patricia Carmichael who is the head of human resources, the chief financial officer, and the chief legal officer. She has 30 years of experience in the field of corporate investigations. They presented the evidence in a methodical manner, including the fabricated emails, the stolen work, the fabricated expense reports, and the metadata that supported the claim that she had created them herself. There were attempts made by Isabel to enchant them, to cry, and to be angry. There was no success. In a tone that was icy and businesslike, Patricia Carmichael addressed Isabel Grant from the audience. You are terminated effective immediately. The company will be pursuing full restitution for fraudulent expenses totaling $85,000. We will also be reporting this matter to law enforcement for potential criminal prosecution. When Isabel stood up, she said, "You can't do this. My family has connections." The words, "My father, your father has no connections that matter here," were spoken in a low voice by Harrington. "You're done, Isabel. Security will escort you out." Observing her exit through a back elevator, I watched her go. Along each side, there was a security guard who was carrying her personal belongings in a banker's box. In the evening of that day, I made my first phone call to my parents since attending the wedding. "Ethan," Mom said in a bright and oblivious tone of voices. "We were just talking about you. Did you hear about poor Isabel? She's going through something difficult at work. I told her you might be able to help her find a new job. I know about Grandpa's education fund." There is no sound. "I know you took my $50,000 and gave it to Isabel. I have the bank records. I have the transfer receipts. I know everything." Even more silence. And then the voice of my father. In a defensive stance. "That money was invested. It was stolen. You stole my inheritance and gave it to your favorite child. While I worked 3 jobs and ate ramen, she was living in a luxury apartment with my money." Isabel needed opportunities, Mom said, her voice trembling for a moment. "She had so much potential and I had nothing. I had no potential. I was just the embarrassment." Dad said, "We were going to pay you back. To the child. Eventually, when things were better. 18 years. You had 18 years. Instead you laughed when she humiliated me at her wedding. A wedding I planned that I paid $3,500 for." I ended the call before they could come back to me. The family got together for a meal at my Aunt Helen's house. This took place 4 weeks after the wedding. After receiving a personal phone call from Aunt Helen, I almost decided not to go. In her words, "Please come," she had pleaded. "It's important. Trust me." My entire family was gathered together when I walked in the door. My parents, along with my aunts, uncles and cousins, were seated in a stiff manner at one end of the table. There was no sign of Isabel. Daniel was not one of them. Although she was 72 years old, Aunt Helen was still in her spine as she stood at the head of the table. "I invited everyone here tonight because I have something to say," she said in her announcement. "For 40 years I have watched this family treat Ethan like he doesn't exist, like he doesn't matter. I'm done being silent." Suddenly my father began to say something. She raised her hand aloft. She turned her attention to the room and said, "John, please take a seat. You'll listen for once. Let me tell you about the nephew you've all ignored. 10 years ago I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The treatment cost more than I had. I was going to sell my house. Ethan paid my medical bills anonymously, $12,000. I didn't find out it was him until 3 years later." The color stopped in my mother's face. When Daniel, the son of John and Martha, needed assistance with applying to colleges, who spent hours assisting him with writing essays, preparing for tests, and navigating the process of applying for financial aid. Ethan. Daniel was awarded a full scholarship. Ethan's assistance was never acknowledged by any of you at any point in time, she said, pulling out documents, printed emails and letters. When John and Martha lost their jobs during the 2009 recession, who co-signed their car loan so they could get to job interviews? Ethan. When their mortgage was about to default, who gave them $9,000 interest-free? Ethan. The eyes of my parents took in the table. This is the man you called the embarrassment of the family, Aunt Helen said, her voice breaking. The man who's been quietly saving all of you for decades while you praised Isabel, who it turns out is a criminal. The room was silent. Maybe, Aunt Helen said softly. It's time you took a good look at who actually matters in this family. Isabel showed up at my office 8 weeks after the termination. She looked exhausted, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, eyes red from crying. Can I come in? She asked. I let her sit. Didn't offer coffee. I've been going to therapy, she said quietly. Twice a week. My therapist, Dr. Lisa Patton, she's been practicing for 22 years. She asked me to write down every time you helped me, every time you were there and I took credit or ignored you. She pulled out a notebook. Pages and pages of handwriting. I got to page 43 before I couldn't write anymore. 43 pages of times you showed up for me and I treated you like you were nothing. Tears ran down her face. I always thought you were weak because you never fought back because you just took it. But you weren't weak. You were stronger than any of us. You were better than us. And I destroyed everything trying to be someone I thought mattered when you were the only one who actually did. She stood. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally see you. Really see you. And I'm sorry, Ethan, for all of it. She left before I could respond. My parents invited me to dinner 10 weeks after the wedding. There were only the three of us at their residence. I was on the verge of saying no. However, there was something broken in the way that my father spoke to me over the phone that caused me to agree. A significant number of Isabel's photographs had been removed. The appearance of the house was altered, smaller. As he poured coffee, Dad said, I've been thinking about your grandfather. While his hands were shaking. How proud he was when you graduated college. He told me you reminded him of himself. Hard-working, honest, strong. I paid him no attention, Dad went on to say. Isabel was the one who had the most genuine aspirations, he was told. I was so focused on her achievements that I forgot to see yours. Across the table, Mom extended her hand. I refrained from taking her hand. As she spoke, tears streamed down her face. I thought you were strong enough not to need us, she said. You never vented your frustrations, and you never sought assistance. I told myself that meant you were fine, that you didn't need a mother like Isabel did. But I was wrong, she sobbed. It meant that you were fine. You did need me. You needed both of us and we failed you. We completely failed you as parents. Father's voice was trembling. I stole your inheritance because I believed Isabel would make better use of it because I thought she was more important than you. The decision was the worst thing I've ever done. But I've spent the past 17 years convincing myself that it was the best option. Despite the fact that they were crying and sitting there broken, I felt nothing but something. Certainly not forgiveness, not at this time, but perhaps the possibility of it in the future. I need time, I said to myself. Years probably, and I need you to understand that I'm not the embarrassment anymore. I never was. You just didn't want to see me. We see you now, Dad murmured to his son. Finally. And you're extraordinary. 6 months after the wedding, Richard Harrington and I launched a program through Parkview Financial Group that offers free restructuring services to small businesses that are experiencing a crisis. It was referred to as the Second Chance Initiative as well. One of the first businesses that we were able to save was a bakery in Hartford that was owned by a family and reminded me of Reed Furniture. When I informed the proprietor that the consultation would not cost her anything, she broke down in tears. The question that she posed was, why would you help me? Because someone helped me once, I explained to myself. And I'm paying it forward. The article that was written about the initiative in the local newspaper was sent to me by my parents, along with a note that read, "Proud of you." At long last, I tucked it away in a drawer. It wasn't because I was dependent on their approval anymore, rather, it was because I no longer needed it. A card was sent to me by Isabel 3 months after that event. She had accepted a position as a junior accountant at a minor company, where she was earning only a quarter of what she had previously earned. The card had a clean design. Not you, but we were the ones who caused the embarrassment. Please accept my gratitude for demonstrating to me what it means to be honest. It was not because I had forgiven her that I found that card sitting on my desk. Not at this time. The reason for this was that she had finally seen me for the very first time. It's possible that in the long run, that will be sufficient. I saved for 12 years to buy my own apartment. When my sister asked for $55,000 to contest her affair, I said no. She scratched my face in public. 6 years ago, my sister Emily, who is 4 years older than me, was married to Ryan. A really wonderful man. Ryan is from a wealthy household. They are therefore quite comfortable while not being extremely wealthy, and he is a successful professional who makes a respectable living on his own. Prior to meeting Ryan, my sister worked a few part-time jobs, but she never had any significant savings or long-term ambitions. As a result, she has never been particularly focused on developing a career for herself. She has always been more interested in social events and savoring the present, which is undoubtedly her decision. When she and Ryan made the decision to tie the knot, his parents were heavily involved in the preparations. They helped them with a down payment on a home, and paid for a significant portion of the wedding. Their attorneys recommended a prenuptial agreement because of this financial interest. When Ryan brought it up to my sister, he was very tactful, and explained that it was really a routine practice for his family, and that it was mostly a precaution to safeguard his premarital savings, and his family's assets. Audrey was returning to my parents, he remarked. Henry had said he wouldn't return, and she couldn't afford the flat without him. Henry allegedly told Audrey he felt stuck and never wanted kids. He promised to pay child support but wouldn't become involved. I wondered why Audrey had a baby with a child-averse man. Audrey thought Henry would change his mind when the kid was delivered, said my dad. I said that plan was bad. My dad agreed, but claimed nothing could be done. He asked whether I'd visit Audrey at my parents' house when she settled in. I agreed to consider. He understood why I was distant. But Audrey was my sister. Many disagreements resulted from their discussions over the prenuptial agreement, which at the time did not sit well with my sister. My mother even intervened in the argument, informing my sister that she thought the entire concept was offensive. I decided to keep my distance from the entire situation because I thought it was their relationship and, thus, their decision to make jointly. Ultimately, my sister did sign the contract, because she desired the lavish wedding and the opulent lifestyle that accompanied Ryan's marriage. She so accepted his family's situation. For 6 years, everything about their life together seemed ideal. They were able to travel a lot and lived in a lovely home. Additionally, Ryan was really kind to my sister, and covered all of the expenses, so she never had to work. To everyone who saw them, their marriage appeared to be quite happy since he purchased her a wonderful automobile, and made sure she had a large allowance for anything she desired. He was always courteous and friendly to our family, including me. And he always seemed to love her very much. I've always been more reserved and quiet, and I've worked really hard to get a steady career in a technical profession. Even though I don't earn a lot of money, I handle it with extreme caution and responsibility. Last week, she called. She asked how many people were coming to give the caterer a head count. Attending wasn't my plan. Why not? I explained Audrey, and I hadn't spoken in months, and I wouldn't pretend everything was good at a family function. My mom stated the baptism was about the baby, not Audrey and me. I stated the infant wouldn't remember anyone. My absence will be remembered, she added. I accepted that. She warned me I'd regret it. She suggested it would be too late if I wanted a relationship with my nephew. I told Audrey could locate me if she wanted me in her son's life. My mom hung up silently. The baptism was yesterday. I stayed. Instead, Luke and I hiked. She could not possibly refute what had transpired. She also acknowledged it to him when he challenged her. According to reports, Ryan was upset by the news and requested her to leave their home the same day after packing her bags. Remaining steadfast in his choice, he told her unequivocally that he would be divorcing her right away since he could never trust her again. Then, in utter anguish, my sister arrived at my mom's house, sobbing and declaring that her life was ended. My sister has been staying at my mom's house for the past 2 months, spending her days phoning attorneys and frantically looking for a way to contest the prenuptial agreement she voluntarily signed. As a result, my mom's house has become the focal point of all this turmoil. All of this culminates in my mother and sister sitting me down for a very serious conversation last night. They assured me that the prenuptial agreement is quite powerful and unbreakable, especially with the explicit adultery clause, according to the lawyers my sister has spoken to. They claimed that it would be very costly to challenge it in court, and that there was very little possibility of success. Ryan gave my sister a nice allowance for years, but she spent it all on clothes, salon visits, and lunches with her friends, so she has no money of her own to finance such a struggle, because she has no savings at all. My sister went on to say that hiring a very aggressive and costly attorney, who seems to be an expert in contesting these kinds of agreements, was her last remaining choice. She informed me that this attorney thinks there may be a remote possibility of arguing for a settlement, but it would take a protracted and complicated legal struggle to even try. When my sister informed me that she required $55,000 for the legal retainer and the impending expenses for this attorney, they finally reached the main topic of discussion. My mother was seated next to her and nodded encouragingly as she looked straight at me. Additionally, she requested that I send her the funds from my own savings. I couldn't believe they wanted me to give them the money I had saved for my apartment, the same money I had worked for every day for the previous 12 years. So I sat there for a second to make sure I had heard them correctly. They wanted me to give it to my sister, who had strayed on her husband, so she could try to get money from him. No, I told them. When I just responded, no, I'm not going to do that, I maintained my composure. My refusal sparked an instantaneous and extremely angry response. My sister began to rage at me, accusing me of being self-centered, and claiming that I was glad to see her suffer now because I had always been envious of her. She maintained that she was my sister, and that family members should support one another in any situation. My mother joined in right away, reminding me that I had a responsibility to my sister, and that, in contrast to her, I had a lot of money saved. She accused me of being callous, and of failing her during her most vulnerable moment. She even went so far as to blame Ryan for the prenuptial agreement's terrible nature, painting my sister as the victim. I simply reiterated that my response was no rather than arguing with them. I informed them that I would not be using my money for her legal bills because they were for my own future. I added that since she signed the prenuptial agreement, and was the one who was unfaithful, her predicament was directly caused by her own acts. She made these decisions, and I wouldn't be responsible for the fallout. Then I got off of my chair and walked out of my mom's house. My phone has been inundated with calls and texts from both of them ever since. Additionally, it has spread to several of my aunts, who have only heard my sister's biased and sentimental version of events. They are all accusing me of being self-centered and unsupportive of my choice. I feel like I'm living in a weird world because I haven't replied to any of them. She made a grave error, and is now dealing with the repercussions she consented to in writing. Whereas I worked diligently and responsibly. I'm being portrayed as the villain in all of this, though, for some reason. Reddit, are you mad at me for not giving my sister the money I saved for my own house so she may fight for her divorce? First update. It was really nice to realize that I am not entirely insane for thinking the way I do. So I would like to thank everyone who left a comment on my initial post. I appreciate the clarity because after reading many of the comments, it appears that the verdict is largely NTA. Since the major blow-up, I still don't interact with my family. But regrettably, things have become worse. In order to record the events that have transpired since then, I felt that I should provide an update. The irate texts and calls persisted for 2 days in a row after I left my mom's place that evening. My mom had obviously contacted her sisters, my aunts, and given them a very biased and emotional account of what had happened, so the messages weren't only from my mom and sister, Emily. Consequently, 2 of my aunts wrote me lengthy texts expressing their profound disappointment in me. Although they acknowledged Emily's error, they maintained that Ryan's dismissal of her with nothing was cruel. They gave me lectures about how important family is, and how I should support my sister. One of them even said that while money is merely paper money, family endures forever. Since none of them have offered Emily any money of their own, and they simply expect me to do so, it is quite simple for them to say such things. I made the decision to put my phone on silent, rather than respond to any of these messages because I needed to concentrate on my work, and the incessant alerts were interfering. The messages eventually ceased after approximately 50 hours of this constant onslaught, and I assumed that perhaps they had given up and were going to quit bothering me. The stillness was merely a prelude to their attempting a new tactic, therefore I was terribly mistaken. My sister Emily sent a lengthy and heartfelt message on social media a few days ago. Although she didn't specifically mention me by name, anyone familiar with us could tell who she was referring to. She chronicled her heartbreak, and the abandonment of those closest to her in a lengthy, depressing tale about the worst period of her life. She then went into detail on how some family members who you would assume would be your strongest allies, can actually be the most self-centered individuals. She went on to write about people hoarding money, and preferring to watch their own family members perish rather than lend a helping hand. She concluded with an ambiguous statement about how difficult times are when you truly discover who your true family is. Many of her friends, who are unaware of the whole scenario, sent supportive comments for her, stating how brave she was, and how awful it was that she was being abused this way. Recently, several of our mutual pals who follow us have started giving me odd looks, and I know that's because they read the post. My sister has spent our entire lives perfecting the art of playing the victim, and she has always been quite excellent at it. She used to cry so convincingly when she damaged something when we were youngsters that my parents would accuse me of upsetting her. And this seems to be the same habit in adulthood. I knew I could disregard the irritating social media post, but it was far more difficult to ignore what followed. My mother unexpectedly showed up at my apartment complex last night. You must be buzzed in to access the secure building where I reside, and it was her when my intercom rang at about 8 p.m. She hadn't given me a call to let me know she was coming. She arrived at my door just now. I didn't want her inside. However, I didn't want her to cause a commotion in the lobby that would be visible to all of my neighbors. I then gave her a buzz. She started on me again as soon as she entered my apartment. However, this time she used a different strategy, rather than yelling. She was crying when she informed me that Emily had not eaten and had been screaming all day. She also stated that she was concerned about Emily's psychological well-being. She claimed that I was being aloof and that my unwillingness to assist was driving Emily insane. She told me that Ryan had already canceled all of Emily's credit cards and served her with divorce papers, leaving her entirely reliant on my mom, who is retired and has a limited income. You have all this money just sitting in a bank account where it is not doing anything while your sister is suffering right now. You can always make more money, but you only have one sister. She continued to discuss my savings, and I attempted to clarify that the money was not simply sitting there but rather was the product of years of personal sacrifice. I told her that I didn't take vacations. I don't purchase pricey items, and I have put in extra hours wherever I can to accumulate money for my future security. When I said that, her attitude quickly shifted, and her face hardened, and the tears stopped. She claimed that our father, who died 12 years ago, would be embarrassed by my selfishness and that he always put his family first. She went on to accuse me of looking down on my sister, and of believing that I was superior to them just because I had saved money and had a better career. From that point on, the debate ran in circles, but I refused to back down and informed her that my choice was definite. She eventually became very irate once more and began pointing at items in my tiny apartment, such as my laptop and television, and said that if I truly wanted to assist, I should sell those items. She legitimately feels that my personal assets are a family resource pool that she and my sister should have unrestricted access to, which is why her entitlement was so startling. I informed her that I was done talking to her, and that she had to leave my house because I had finally had enough of the pointless dispute. She vehemently objected, saying she would stay on my couch until I consented to assist my sister. I then threatened to contact building security if she didn't leave. At last, she got to her feet. When she approached me, I honestly feared that she may start to get aggressive. Rather, she simply leaned very close to me and said, "I will regret this," in a whisper, adding that I would remember this moment, and realize what I had thrown away when I was elderly and alone with my money. Then she slammed the door firmly behind her, as she turned around and walked away. I've since banned the phone numbers of my mother, sister, and aunts who were messaging me. They won't respect my boundaries, and the pressure won't go away, so even though I realize this is a major step, I feel like I have no other option. What they will try next worries me. My mom visiting my flat, and the social media posts seem like a major escalation. This seems to be the start of a prolonged battle. Even though I haven't changed my opinion about the money, I'm beginning to see that this update may irreparably damage my relationship with my mother and sister. A few weeks have passed since my last update, and I believed that the harassment would stop once I blocked their numbers, and had that last run-in with my mother. Now the situation has now progressed in unexpected ways, and has now directly affected my professional life. I was incredibly stupid to believe that, honored her, and inquired about Henry. She said they were together but he worked a lot. She switched topics when I asked if they were getting married. I should have noticed that was weird. Audrey requested my baby shower planning assistance a few weeks after that call. She stated our mom worked too much, and our sister Caroline lived out of state. I replied, "Sure. A project would be wonderful." We started planning via video call. Audrey suggested June 20th for the baby shower during that call. My wedding anniversary, I informed her. Luke and I planned a weekend getaway for our 5th anniversary, a milestone. We reserved an upstate property with a non-refundable deposit. She noted that Ryan's attorney had forwarded a letter to her own attorney, formally stating their desire to fully execute the prenuptial agreement, which would mean she would receive nothing at all. The letter also said unequivocally that there was no use in attempting to dispute the fact that they had solid evidence of her adultery. Her email continued by stating that she was obviously in a panic, and that her lawyer was now terminating her as a client since she was unable to pay the initial retainer amount. She alleged that I was supporting Ryan against her, and accused me of deserting her once more, conveniently omitting to explain that she was the one who pushed the pin on the grenade. She stated that I had no concept what it was like to have your entire existence torn out from under you. She referred to the email as her final opportunity to obtain justice, and it concluded with yet another adamant demand for the $55,000. Instead of responding to the email, I built a filter that would direct any future correspondence from her, my mother, or my aunts to a different folder that I don't check. I was at work a couple days following the email. I was in the middle of a team meeting at about 11 a.m. Luke ordered me to cease talking to them. "We should follow our plans," he replied. He noted that Audrey had never tried much with us as a couple. We invited her several times but she didn't come. She rarely spoke to Luke during family functions. He thought she wanted me to prove I'd pick her over him. Audrey texted me, my mom, Caroline, and our Aunt Jessica a week before the baby shower. She told me she was disappointed in me for leaving her at a crucial time. She stated good sisters support one another and she thought I didn't care about her or her baby. She said she'd know where I was if I skipped the shower. Without responding, I quit the group chat. Luke and I traveled. Excellent weekend. My bridesmaid Audrey spent most of the reception in the bar with her then boyfriend Dylan. My aunt said Audrey appeared bored during the ceremony. I ignored it because weddings are long, and not everyone likes sitting through them. Audrey and I spoke possibly monthly after the wedding. She moved for work, so we saw each other less. A year after my wedding, she dumped Dylan for Henry. I only met Henry at a family Christmas meal 1.5 years ago. He seemed friendly but quiet. Audrey told me they were serious but never disclosed their connection. From here, everything went wrong. Audrey contacted me unexpectedly on a Tuesday night 7 months ago. So she told me she was pregnant, honored her, and inquired about Henry. She said they were together but he worked a lot. She switched topics when I asked if they were getting married. I should have noticed that was weird. Audrey requested my baby shower planning assistance a few weeks after that call. She stated our mom worked too much and our sister Caroline lived out of state. I replied, sure. A project would be wonderful. We started planning via video call. Audrey suggested June 20th for the baby shower during that call. My wedding anniversary, I informed her. Luke and I planned a weekend getaway for our 5th anniversary, a milestone. We reserved an upstate property with a non-refundable deposit. I was so furious that night that I was having trouble thinking since I never imagined that she would go so far as to show up for work. It was such an obvious and deceptive attempt to utilize public humiliation to achieve her goals. Emily somehow discovered my work email address the following day, which made matters worse. In addition to sending me a new email, she copied my supervisor, whose email is on the corporate website, and the company's general HR email address. She claimed that I was concealing family finances that were meant to be divided between us following the death of our father. But the email she sent was a total and entire fiction of the facts. She said that I was leaving her penniless and exploiting my position as the purported executor of his will, which is untrue because I am not and have never been the executor of anything. She presented me as a cold-blooded, cunning thief, who was robbing her own sister, and she sent a copy of Ryan's lawyer's divorce paperwork to support her desperate claim. This caused me a great deal of trouble at work, and my boss called me into his office right away, along with an HR representative. Her email was printed out and placed on the table. They were quite serious when they told me that the corporation needed to take these charges seriously for legal reasons since they were very severe. I had to tell them about the whole wretched situation, to demonstrate the lengthy pattern of harassment and to demonstrate that the narrative in her email was wholly untrue. I had to present them with the text conversations and earlier emails from Emily and my mother. I had to clarify that the monies were my own personal savings from my own salary, and that there were no family funds. In the end, my supervisor and the HR representative were sympathetic as they could see from the proof that I was the target of the harassment. But they told me quite firmly that I needed to ensure that this family problems didn't reappear at work. Even though they told me it wouldn't have an impact on my employment. They recorded the incident, and it is now part of my permanent employee record. I had to hire a lawyer to send my mother and sister Emily an official cease and desist letter requesting that they stop contacting me at work. My sister didn't simply try to make me look bad. So the tension from all of this is unbearable. She made a concerted effort to harm my reputation and career. This was no longer about asking me for assistance. Clearly, the goal was retaliation. She chose to try to harm my ability to earn money for myself, since she was unable to obtain my money. Since I am almost positive that this harassment will continue, I am currently investigating my legal alternatives. Update 3. Once more, hello. Since my last update, in which I detailed the awful event of my mother showing up at work and my sister emailing my supervisor, a lot has transpired. For a brief period, the emails and direct communication ceased, and the legal letter I sent appeared to be effective. But now, the dispute has turned physical and, to be honest, rather frightening. I went so far as to alter my personal email address, in an attempt to fully isolate myself from them following the incident at work. Additionally, I adjusted my social media privacy settings as strictly as I could. Even though I felt like I was living in a stronghold, it seemed essential for my mental well-being. I concentrated on my job and my apartment buying strategy. In fact, I made an offer on a tiny property, and it was approved. I experienced a genuine sensation of forward motion in my own life for the first time in months. Our cousin's wedding last weekend absolutely upended that feeling of tranquility. Knowing that my mother and sister would be attending, made me quite reluctant to attend the wedding. However, I had always been close to the cousin getting married, and despite of their conflict, I did not want to miss her wedding. For the sake of our relative, I believed that we adults could at least be polite in public for a few hours. However, this proved to be a serious mistake on my behalf. When I got to the reception area, I tried to blend in as much as possible by picking a table with a few of my acquaintances. Across the room, I could feel Emily and my mother observing me. They remained on their side of the room while I remained on mine, and nothing happened for approximately an hour. I began to unwind a little. Then, while the band was taking a break and things were quieter, Emily began to approach my table with purpose. As she walked up, she had a glass of red wine in her hand and a stern, irate expression on her face. All of my companions at the table were tense, since they were aware of some of the events that had been taking place. Emily paused just in front of me and initially remained silent. She simply fixed her fierce gaze on me. Then she began to speak. She claimed to have read on social media that I was purchasing an apartment, which must have been brought up by a common acquaintance. She went on to say that since my mom can no longer support her, it must be nice to be purchasing a home just before she is being evicted from her home. I just told her that this was not the time or place for this conversation while ignoring her provocations. When I responded, she narrowed her eyes and stated, "You have no heart. You are just like our father. Cold and selfish." It was a really low blow to bring up our father, especially in that context. It seems to be their go-to tactic, and it was the same line my mother had previously used on me. I didn't want to make a scene at my cousin's wedding, so I got up from my chair and informed her I was going.
Hello, I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you, and let's begin our creative audio journey together.
While she was still shouting and pushing against them, my pals and a few of my cousin's groomsmen leaped up and succeeded in removing her from me. After that, my mother hurried over, but she didn't come to discipline her daughter. She arrived to justify her behavior. She began screaming at me right away, asking me what I had said to agitate Emily and attempting to hold me accountable for her physical assault. The bride, my cousin, was crying as she watched her wedding be ruined, as the scenario turned into utter turmoil. The disturbance appeared to have infuriated her new husband. Their actions utterly destroyed the wedding. After a while, venue security arrived and dragged my mother and Emily out of the building while yelling obscenities. I was left standing there trembling with rage and drenched with wine. It was ridiculous that my cousin and her husband came over to apologize to me when they had nothing to do with it. I assured them that I was all right, and expressed my sincere regret that my family had spoiled their great day. Soon after, I departed. Emily had grabbed me, and I could see the scratches on my arms and neck the following day. I proceeded to the police station. In addition to giving them the names of the witnesses from my table, and the venue security team's contact details, I formally reported her for assault. My mother encouraged and defended my sister's physical attack on me. Therefore, I'm done being passive in this scenario. This is no longer merely a financial dispute within the family. My personal safety is becoming a major concern. Additionally, I spoke with a lawyer about obtaining a restraining order against them, and the process has now begun. I never would have imagined that I would be suing my own mother and sister, but their increasingly aggressive actions have left me with no other option. They have physically attacked me in a public setting, harassed me, and attempted to destroy my career. No matter how distant the prospect of reconciliation may have appeared, it is now totally gone, and there is no turning back now. They have revealed their true selves to me. And now my first objective is to safeguard my physical and legal interests. Last update. This will be my last update on the subject at hand. Though it is by no means a pleasant conclusion, the events of the last few months have finally come to an end. I'm writing this primarily to give myself a sense of closure, and to record the conclusion for everyone who has followed this challenging tale. I pursued the legal actions I had outlined in my last post following the assault at my cousin's wedding. Since there were plenty of witnesses who were eager to testify about what they saw, my sister Emily was officially charged with assault as a result of the police report I submitted. Although the legal procedure moves slowly, it is proceeding as it should. In addition, I was successful in getting a restraining order against Emily and my mother, which the judge approved after hearing my testimony and looking over all of the supporting documentation. The official police report from the wedding attack, the emails they sent to my workplace, and the records of my mother's visit to my office were all examples of this evidence. They are now legally obligated to avoid me, my house, and my place of employment. Also, they are not permitted to get in touch with me either directly or indirectly. Despite being merely a piece of paper, it establishes a distinct legal barrier that, if ever crossed, carries serious repercussions. I'm now living in my own house after my apartment's closing went smoothly. It's a tiny space, but it belongs to me. More significantly, it provides a peaceful haven where I can avoid being harassed by strangers. Caroline called me the day Audrey returned from the hospital. Audrey needs help breastfeeding and sleeping, she added. I approached Philip for assistance. Caroline paused and stated Philip was there but had to work. I thought that was challenging. But I wasn't driving there. Caroline wondered if I would harbor a grudge against my nephew. I didn't harbor a grudge against anyone, including the baby, but I wouldn't lie and say Audrey was okay. Caroline stated Audrey was too weary to handle our difficulties, and I should be the larger person. Luke asked her what she wanted after we hung up. He shook his head and said they were unbelievable when I informed him. Ryan and Emily have finalized their divorce. And the prenuptial agreement was totally and completely enforced, just as everyone had anticipated. She didn't get any of his assets or spousal support, and from what I've heard, she had to sell the car he had previously given her, in order to cover some of her first legal fees and living expenses. Due to her restricted retirement income and inability to sustain a second adult indefinitely, my mother's financial circumstances are also dire. My cousin has informed me that their relationship has deteriorated to the point where they live together in my mom's tiny home, where the tension and animosity are ongoing, and frequently result in loud arguments. It appears that Emily is still hoping for a miraculous solution to materialize out of thin air, and has not made any attempt to locate employment. Since the wedding, I haven't seen or spoken to any of them, and although my life is more quieter today, it is also more solitary. Despite all of their horrible flaws, my mother and sister played a vital role in my life, which has now been entirely severed. After years of quietly supporting my family, I offered my dad a retirement gift. He threw it back, accusing me of trying to show off. My name is Natalie, and at 32 years old, I started a $20 million business from scratch with no college education. For years, I silently supported my family financially while they judged my professional choices. Last month, during my father's birthday dinner, everything changed when he called me illiterate trash and told me to leave his house. What he didn't realize was how accomplished I had become. 3 weeks later, the expression on his face made every tear I wept worthwhile. Before I tell you how I went from supporting my family to being called garbage by my own father, please leave a comment and tell me where you're viewing from. If you've ever felt underestimated by those who should have believed in you the most, click the like button and subscribe. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, where expectations were straightforward and customary. My father, Richard, had been an accountant at the same firm for 30 years and was convinced that education was the only genuine path to success. My mother, Helen, taught elementary school and silently supported his viewpoints. From a young age, I knew I was different from my siblings, David and Claire, who both took the traditional road. Even at the age of 10, I had evidence of a business mentality that perplexed my parents. While the other kids played after school, I ran an elaborate lemonade stand with a variety of flavor selections and loyalty cards for repeat customers. By the age of 13, I was servicing computers for neighbors, charging $20 per hour instead of the local repair shop's $75. My parents saw these activities as cute hobbies, nothing more. Natalie needs to focus on academics instead of these little business projects, my father would say at supper. These games will not pay the bills when she grows up. High school was tough. I maintained good grades while spending my free time reading business books and following entrepreneurs online. While my siblings joined clubs that would seem good on college applications, I started an internet company selling personalized phone cases that I made myself, earning nearly $2,000 before graduating. Despite my reservations, I enrolled in community college to satisfy my parents. It just took one semester to prove what I already knew. The controlled environment felt like a prison, and the business classes were taught by professors who had never ran their own businesses. When I addressed my parents about skipping out to pursue my business ideas, the fight lasted several days. "You will throw your life away," my father yelled, his cheeks flushed. "No child of mine will be a college dropout working minimum wage jobs forever." Despite this, I left school at 19 with barely $2,000 saved from different side hustles. The first few months were terrible. I rented a small studio apartment in a dodgy neighborhood, the type where you never do laundry after dark. I survived on ramen noodles and inexpensive food products while working 18-hour days to establish my e-commerce website. My first 3 business ventures failed totally. I lost money on a dropshipping enterprise because vendors provided substandard products. My social media management service failed because I underpriced my services and burned out attempting to serve too many clients. My endeavor to make handcrafted jewelry did not expand beyond occasional sales at local markets. Each failure offered essential lessons that no college course could offer. I learned supply chain management the hard way, effective client contract structures through unpleasant experience, and production scalability by confronting its constraints personally. The turning point came when I met Catherine at a local business networking event, who was 20 years my senior and had many successful exits. She noticed something in me that my family never did. She became the mentor I urgently needed, imparting practical business wisdom without regard for my lack of academic education. "Education comes in many forms," Catherine told me over coffee. "Some of the most successful people I know learned by doing, not sitting in classrooms." At 22, I polished my business strategy with her advice. I established an e-commerce platform that united small American producers with customers looking for locally made products. The timing was ideal, riding a wave of enthusiasm for supporting small firms and home production. Those early days demanded tremendous sacrifice. I converted half of my little apartment into a makeshift workplace, sleeping on a sofa that also served as my couch. My desktop computer and printer took up much of my living space. I worked from 5 a.m. until 11 p.m., managing everything from website coding to customer service calls. The breakthrough came 8 months later when a well-known lifestyle blogger featured one of our artisan partners. Orders poured in, exceeding our basic systems. I worked for 72 hours straight, fulfilling orders and updating our website infrastructure. That single feature generated $10,000 in revenue, more than I'd ever seen in my account. I called my folks, eager to share my progress. My father answered with wary skepticism. "That is nice, honey, but it is probably just temporary. You know you can always go back to college when this thing runs its course." His words wounded, but they also fired my determination. I would show him wrong, not with arguments, but with incontrovertible results. The following 5 years were a whirl of constant growth and obstacles. My e-commerce site, Coastal Crafted, grew beyond its original concept. We started with only 27 artisan partners across 3 states. By year 3, we had represented over 400 manufacturers and artisans from all 50 states, connecting them with customers who appreciated American-made items. Each level of development presented unique problems. When our server broke during a large offer, I stayed up for 48 hours straight, working with developers to restore the site and personally responding customer emails to retain goodwill. When a larger competitor attempted to lure our top sellers with promises of better terms, I pushed to meet with each one in person, strengthening relationships and boosting our incentive structure. The most challenging period was in year 2, when cash flow almost choked the business. We were growing too quickly for our capital basis, with inventory requirements exceeding income. I went without a salary for 4 months, moved to a smaller apartment to save money, and negotiated longer payment terms with suppliers. Those months taught me financial discipline, which would help me as the company grew. Major milestones occurred in rapid succession. Our first office was a converted industrial facility downtown, and I employed 3 people to manage customer service and seller relations. Midway through year 3, I reached $1 million in yearly revenue, which I celebrated alone in my office with a single glass of champagne after everyone else had departed. Throughout it all, I kept my burgeoning success relatively private from my family. They knew I had a website firm that was performing well, but I minimized the full scope of our expansion. Their initial discouragement had built a barrier that I was unable to overcome. A part of me hoped they'd ultimately ask thorough questions about my job, demonstrating true curiosity, but those conversations never happened. Despite their lukewarm support, I continued to assist my family financially as needed. When my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in the 4th year of my business, I secretly paid the $75,000 in medical bills that were not covered by insurance. My father revealed an insurance payout that had spared them from medical bills, without realizing its source. My brother David struggled with the down payment for his first home. His financial account was $40,000 short of what he required. I made a family loan through a second account, making it appear to be from a distant uncle. He gladly accepted the money, but whenever we talked about my profession, he kept mentioning getting a real job with benefits. Claire, my sister, had always dreamed of having the perfect wedding. When her fiancé, Ethan, lost his job 6 months before the wedding, I covered the $50,000 difference between the location and food. Claire knew the money came from me, but she reduced it at family gatherings, alluding to my small online business, which was doing well. The gap between my actual accomplishment and my family's perceptions fueled an increasingly agonizing internal conflict. By day, I oversaw strategy meetings for a multi-million-dollar company, made choices that impacted hundreds of partner businesses, and negotiated exclusive collections with large retail chains. By night, I received texts from family members who treated me like I was a college dropout who got lucky with the internet. My company's headquarters grew to a full floor in a downtown office building, with 38 full-time employees and an active internship program. Our valuation rose to $20 million after a Business Insider piece drew the attention of numerous investors. I retained majority ownership, rejecting takeover bids that would have made me wealthy but cost me control of my vision. As my father's 60th birthday neared, I reached a conclusion. It was time to be open about my accomplishments, not to brag, but to finally break through the myths and hopefully win the respect I had been pursuing for years. I bought a large gift, a fully funded retirement investment account, and prepared to present it along with the truth about my company during his birthday dinner. The night before the meal, I practiced what I would say. I was no longer the uncertain 19-year-old looking for acceptance. I was a successful entrepreneur who provided possibilities for hundreds of American manufacturers and dozens of employees. Surely, that would finally earn my father's respect and alter how my family perceived my odd route. I couldn't have been more wrong. The evening of my father's 60th birthday began well enough. Their house appeared precisely like it had throughout my childhood, with the same furnishings and family portraits on the walls. The sole new addition was a giant television that my brother had bought for them last Christmas, which was prominently displayed as a symbol of his financial commitment to the family. My mother greeted me with her usual reserved affection, a short hug and a pat on the back. "You look nice, Natalie. Did you cut your hair?" It was the same haircut I'd had for 3 years. David arrived with his wife Melissa, dressed nicely in business casual attire that gently emphasized their upper-middle-class background. Claire and Ethan arrived shortly after, and Claire immediately began telling stories about her recent rise at the accounting firm where she followed in our father's footsteps. "The partners are already hinting that I might make junior partner next year," she revealed, while assisting to prepare appetizers. Youngest in firm history. During the pre-dinner discussion, no one inquired about my career. When Ethan briefly mentioned viewing an article regarding e-commerce growth, my brother quickly shifted the conversation to his son's minor league accomplishments. Dinner was my mother's typical pot roast with all the fixings, served on fine china saved for special occasions. My father sat at the head of the table, accepting comments on his youthful appearance with reserved modesty. "65 looks good on you, Dad," David replied, raising his glass. "Here's to another 20 years at least." The occasion felt appropriate when dessert was presented. I had patiently waited through conversations about neighborhood gossip, David's children's accomplishments, and Claire's forthcoming vacation plans. No one has asked any questions regarding my life or business. "Dad, Mom, everyone," I said, my heart racing despite my outward calmness. "I wanted to share some news about my company." My father nodded absently, grabbing for another slice of cake. "Coastal Crafted was recently valued at $20 million, I told you. We have received several acquisition offers, and I have been featured in Business Insider and Entrepreneur magazine last month." The hush that followed seemed interminable. My mother froze with her fork halfway into her lips. Claire shared a brief glance with Ethan. David just stared. My father was the first to answer, and his tone was contemptuous. "What exactly does that mean, Natalie? These internet businesses use all sorts of funny math to come up with these valuations." I remained calm, explaining in layman's terms how business values work, our income sources, and growth trajectory. I highlighted our office of 38 employees and collaborations with over 400 American manufacturers. David intervened before I could continue. So, you got lucky with this online thing. That is great, but some of us have been building real careers with actual qualifications. He stressed the word qualifications as he looked at his wife, who nodded in agreement. It is not luck, I explained gently. It is 7 years of working 18-hour days, solving complex problems, and building something meaningful. We have helped save dozens of American manufacturing businesses that were on the verge of closing. My mother eventually spoke, her tone uncertain. That sounds impressive, dear, though I still wish you had finished your degree. Even with this business, education is important. I was losing patience, but I persisted. Actually, I brought something for Dad. I handed him an envelope containing paperwork for the retirement account I had established. I wanted to ensure you both have a comfortable retirement. My father opened the letter, his face darkening as he recognized what he was looking at. Instead of appreciation, his cheeks heated with something resembling rage. What is this supposed to be? Some kind of charity? He dropped the papers on the table. We did not raise you to throw money around like you are better than everyone. That is not my intention at all, I explained. I just wanted to help, the same way I helped with Mom's medical bills, David's house down payment, and Claire's wedding. 3 heads snapped up at the same time. My hidden financial help was abruptly revealed. You, my father exclaimed. That was all you. Claire appeared humiliated. David's visage hardened into something unpleasant. My mother simply looked puzzled. You have been secretly paying for things behind our backs, my father's voice increased with each syllable. Playing the big shot with your internet money. I was just trying to help, I said, my voice lower than I intended. I never wanted recognition, I just wanted to support the family. Support, interrupted David, by making us feel like charity cases. Some of us work honest jobs with actual degrees, not getting rich quick with online schemes. It is not a scheme, I said, feeling the topic slide out of my control. I built a legitimate business that helps American manufacturers reach customers. We employ dozens of people with good salaries and benefits. My father stood up, letting his napkin fall to the floor. You drop out of college against our advice, disappear into your little internet world, and now you come back throwing money around like you have all the answers. That is not what I am doing, I insisted, struggling to keep my voice calm. You think your money makes you successful? He asked, his voice rising more. You are still just uneducated trash who got lucky. Anyone can get lucky. The room went silent. My mother gasped gently and offered nothing in my defense. David gazed down at his plate, a little smile forming in the corner of his mouth. Claire looked split between humiliation and agreement. Richard, my mother finally said, too late and gently to matter. No, my father insisted, now completely agitated. I have worked my entire life the right way. I got an education, built a respectable career, raised a family. I will not be shown up in my own home by my dropout daughter. I arose slowly, collecting my handbag. I should go. Yes, you should, my father retorted. Get out of my house, you lowlife. Your money does not make you part of this family. We have standards. The words landed like physical blows. I examined each face around the table, looking for any ally or hint of support. There was none. Happy birthday, Dad, I replied quietly, heading to the door with all the dignity I could summon. Nobody followed me out. Nobody called after me. I got into my car, my hands shaking so much that I could scarcely grip the steering wheel. As I drove away from the house where I grew up, I felt something essential had broken and could never be fixed. My trip back to the hotel was a jumble of lamps and tears. I had to pull over twice because emotion overcame my capacity to drive safely. The horrible irony wasn't lost on me. I had a multi-million-dollar firm, yet I was spending the night in a hotel in my hometown because my own family's home was no longer accessible to me. In the sterile silence of my hotel room, I repeated the evening's events, scrutinizing every word and emotion. Had I been too forward and proud? Had I misjudged our family dynamics all these years? The financial assistance I had supplied now felt like a silly attempt to buy acceptance that I could never obtain through my own achievements. I took out my laptop and started documenting every penny I had given my family over the years. The list was extensive. $75,000 for my mother's cancer treatment, paid straight to the hospital and doctors. My brother's house cost $120,000, which included not only the down payment but also additional renovations he wanted months later. $50,000 for my sister's wedding, including the location, catering and honeymoon, which she had no idea I paid for. Countless lesser expenses. My father's auto repair last winter, $22,000. My mother's kitchen makeover, $35,000. Christmas gifts, birthday presents, and emergency bills are all handled discreetly through accounts meant to conceal their origin. Nearly $300,000 in all, not including the retirement account my father had recently rejected. Money I never intended to get back, given freely out of love for a family who had just called me garbage. Around midnight my phone lit up with a text from Claire. Dad is still upset, but he will overcome it. You know how he reacts when his authority is challenged. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the awful things stated, only the assumption that I would absorb the abuse and return to the family dynamic as if nothing had occurred. I did not reply. The following morning I contacted a therapist in the city where I usually lived. Dr. Mitchell consented to an emergency virtual session that afternoon. Family wounds cut deepest, she said after I told her about the dinner, especially when they target the very things we have worked hardest to overcome. Dr. Mitchell assisted me in understanding the complicated dynamics at play during the next few days. My achievement jeopardized the family structure and the principles that my parents had based their lives on. My financial support, rather than eliciting gratitude, had sparked animosity by emphasizing a shift in power dynamics that they were unable to accept. Your father's identity is built around being the provider and authority, she told me. Your success challenges both roles. I started journaling, documenting not only the previous night, but also patterns throughout my childhood. Subtle ways my entrepreneurial spirit had been discouraged. Times when academic achievements were celebrated while business successes were downplayed, and the constant reminder that, without a degree, I would never really succeed. This method indicated how thoroughly I had assimilated the messages. Despite my apparent success, a part of me still felt like the family failure, the dropout with something to prove. This explained my reluctance to openly reveal my accomplishments and ongoing financial assistance, without recognition. A week after the awful supper, my sister called. I let it go to voicemail. Natalie, please call back. Dad feels horrible about what occurred, we all do. But you have to realize how it appeared. You walking in and basically flaunting your wealth. It was inconsiderate to those of us who had worked hard for our careers. I deleted the message instead of returning the call. The plot twist was breathtaking. Somehow I had become the villain for just expressing facts about my firm after years of downplaying my success. My brother texted next. Family is family. Let's go past this. There was no apology there either, only an assumption that I would accept my assigned role and the treatment that came with it. 2 weeks after the dinner, I made a choice that felt both terrifying and freeing. I would choose self-respect above destructive familial relationships. My new home would be the beach house I had acquired as an investment property in Naples, Florida the year before. Before leaving, I sent a letter to my parents, not an angry tirade, but a genuine confession of hurt and disappointment. Dear Mother and Father, I've spent years seeking your acceptance and respect. To avoid making anyone uncomfortable, I have provided financial assistance for our family while downplaying my achievement. Despite creating a $20 million company that helps to maintain American manufacturing jobs, I've been made to feel like the family failure because I took a different path than you did. When Dad referred to me as illiterate garbage and a low life, it exposed how you truly perceive me. No amount of accomplishment can ever alter that perception. I cannot continue to be involved in a relationship in which my worth is determined by credentials rather than character and achievement. I will always love you both, but I need to separate for my own well-being. I hope that eventually we can repair our friendship on the basis of mutual respect. Love, Natalie. I sealed the letter and mailed it from the post office myself. No response arrived in the days that followed. I had my executive assistant pack and ship my personal items from Ohio to Florida. I asked her to donate the majority of my furniture and clothing to local charities, as I wanted to start over with as little baggage as possible. My company might be run remotely, with periodic visits back to attend essential meetings. The leadership team I had developed over the years was capable of handling day-to-day operations without my personal presence. As I boarded the plane to Florida, I had a strange mix of loss and freedom. The family I had worked so hard to please was behind me, but so was the pressure of seeking approval I would never receive. Naples, Florida, welcomed me with warm sunshine and salt-scented air, a sharp contrast to the dismal Ohio winter I had left behind. My beach house was a modern two-story structure with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Gulf of Mexico, standing on a secluded stretch of shoreline. I bought it as an investment property the previous year but had only been there twice for short holidays. When I initially arrived, the property felt impersonal, more like an elite hotel than a home. The real estate agency had handled the furniture with normal luxury vacation home decor, which was lovely but soulless. Making my house genuinely mine was a type of therapy. I began in the primary bedroom, replacing the bland beige bedding with handcrafted quilts from one of my coastal crafted craftsmen in North Carolina. The mass-produced art was replaced with original works by emerging American artists I discovered through the business. Each morning, I awoke to the sound of waves and the sight of true creativity all around me. The next step was to renovate the kitchen. I set up open shelving to showcase handcrafted ceramics from our Vermont and New Mexico suppliers. The industrial-grade appliances remained, but colorful hand-woven linens and locally produced wooden serving boards added warmth to the area. Routines became vital to my healing process. Every morning started with a sunrise walk down the beach, feet in the cool sand, gathering shells and watching dolphins arc through the waves offshore. I discovered a small coffee shop managed by a Cuban-American family, where I became a regular, greeted by name rather than order. Running the business remotely was easier than expected. In-person meetings were replaced by video conferences, and our existing systems worked seamlessly with minimum changes. Without the daily drive and office distractions, I found myself more productive and able to make better judgments from my new, serene headquarters. After the first month, my executive team paid a visit and spent 3 days on my oceanfront deck conducting strategic planning meetings. Several people commented on the good changes they saw in my leadership style. "You seem more centered," Tyler, my operations director, remarked. "More confident in your decisions." He was correct. Without the pressure to seek family approval, my business instincts flowed more readily. I trusted my own judgment without the specter of my father's condemnation hovering over each decision. Community involvement became another pillar in my new life. I joined both the local Chamber of Commerce and a business women's networking organization. Unlike in my hometown, where I had minimized my success, here I was forthright about my company and accomplishments. Respect came naturally, free of the baggage of who I was before to my achievement. I became friends with Samantha, the owner of a local art gallery, and she introduced me to her network of people. These were accomplished women in their 30s and 40s who admired each other for their current accomplishments, rather than their former qualifications. Our weekly dinner gatherings became a highlight, filled with laughter and talks that never featured inquiries about my schooling or claims that I had simply gotten lucky. 3 weeks after I moved to Florida, I received an unexpected visit. My brother David showed up suddenly at my door one Saturday afternoon. "Nice place," he exclaimed, whistling as he took in the seaside view from my living room. "Really nice." His arrival was unsettling in my new refuge. He seemed out of place in his button-down shirt and pressed khakis against my casual coastal decor. "What brings you to Florida, David?" I inquired, not offering a drink or a seat. "Family," he said with the same confident smile that had enchanted our parents since infancy. "And I could use some advice about an investment opportunity, possibly a loan to get in on the ground floor." Some patterns were too obvious to be shocking. His facade immediately dissipated in the absence of my parents. This was strictly a financial visit. "I'm not making any loans to family members anymore," I stated firmly. "That chapter is closed." His expression stiffened. "So that is how it is. You move to your beach mansion and forget where you came from. Dad was right about you." "Dad called me uneducated trash and kicked me out of his house," I told him later. "Is that what you came here to reinforce?" David retreated fast. "He did not mean it like that. You know how he gets. Family fights happen." "That was not a fight. It was a revelation," I responded. "Now if you will excuse me, I have plans this afternoon." After showing him around, I sat on my terrace, watching the surf, remarkably unaffected by the experience. The boundaries I was establishing felt proper, even though they were difficult to implement. That evening, I made an important decision. I called my lawyer and set up an anonymous scholarship fund at the community college I had briefly attended. The Natalie Brooks Entrepreneurship Scholarship would offer complete tuition and mentorship to 5 students each year who displayed entrepreneurial potential but lacked traditional academic advantages. Make sure the selection criteria focus on demonstrated initiative and creative problem solving, not grades, I told the applicant. And look for mentors who have actually developed businesses rather than just taught business classes. As the weeks passed, my place actually felt like home. I created a garden of native Florida plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. I rescued a mixed-breed rescue dog named Milo, who accompanied me on beach walks and slept at the foot of my bed. His simple affection was a constant reminder of how relationships should feel. I discovered surprising peace in solitude. Without the continual underlying fear of family criticism, I uncovered facets of myself that had previously been overshadowed by stress. I took a pottery session at a nearby studio and enjoyed the contemplative process despite my lousy skills. I attempted paddleboard yoga, spending more time in the water than on the board, but laughing through each try. 3 weeks became a month, and then 6 weeks. The anguish of familial rejection persisted, but it became less sharp, more like an old hurt that occasionally ached than a new one. I was creating something new here, not simply a home, but a real existence based on my ideals rather than others' expectations. Then came an unforeseen revelation that would bring my family's narrative full circle in ways I never imagined. The Naples Business Journal was not a publication I usually read, but Samantha texted me early one morning and insisted I get a copy. Page 3. You will want to see this. The feature story highlighted local company owners who have an impact outside Florida. There I was, pictured on my deck with the Gulf of Mexico behind me, with the headline, "E-commerce innovator brings multi-million-dollar business to Naples." The journalist had done her research, outlining Coastal Crafted's rise from startup to $20 million valuation, our effect on American manufacturing, and my recent Entrepreneurship Scholarship Foundation. The story presented a considerably more thorough image of achievement than anything I had seen in my hometown media. I did not authorize this, I told Samantha after she called to congratulate me. Public records, she clarified. Property transfers, business registrations. Once they knew you were here, the rest was easy to piece together. Besides, it is a great article. She was correct. The post was well researched and flattering, emphasizing corporate accomplishments rather than personal information. I didn't think much about it until the next week, when my phone began to light up with social media notifications. The piece was taken up by numerous larger business publications, and then widely shared on LinkedIn and Facebook. Former high school classmates immediately recalled our bond. Teachers remarked that they had always recognized my talent. Most surprising were the letters from several small business owners in my hometown, who thanked me for demonstrating what was possible without following established channels. "You motivated me to eventually start my business," wrote one former student. "If you can develop something that substantial without a fancy degree, then perhaps my proposal has value as well." The local newspaper in my hometown published a simplified version of the article with an additional angle. Local entrepreneur makes national impact. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same community that had discreetly reinforced my parents' disappointment suddenly recognized me as a hometown success story. My family eventually discovered the full depth of my accomplishment as a result of the media's ripple effect. The first hint was a friend request from my cousin Hannah, followed by several additional extended family members who had previously expressed little interest in my life. Then my mother texted me. "I saw the article about your company. Very impressive, my dear. Dad and I are quite proud." No mention of his unkind words, no acknowledgement of the schism, just a casual claim of pride that had been noticeably absent while I sat at their dinner table. My father's voice message arrived the following day, his tone deceptively cheerful. "Natalie, there's huge news regarding your company in the paper. I've always known you have it. There appears to have been a misunderstanding last time we spoke. Call me back as soon as you can." A misunderstanding. He referred to his daughter as illiterate trash and ordered her to leave his house. 3 days later my mother texted again. "We are thinking of visiting Florida next month. I would love to see your new place. Let us know if that works for you." The message struck like a stone in my gut. 6 weeks of mending, of creating a new life free of their judgment, and now they wanted to simply show up at my door as if nothing had occurred. I did not answer right away, instead scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Mitchell. "You have several options," she said after hearing my concerns. "You can decline the visit entirely. You can agree, but set strict boundaries about what you will and will not discuss. Or you can see this as an opportunity for honest conversation that might lead to healing, though that requires their willingness to acknowledge the harm done." After careful thinking, I wrote my mother. "You and Dad are welcome to visit, but we need to have an open discussion about what happened at his birthday dinner before we can proceed. Please let me know if you are open to that kind of conversation." Her response was quick. "Of course, dear. We just want to get this behind us and be a family again." The phrase bothered me, the desire to put everything behind us without confronting it directly, but I finalized plans for their visit the following month. As the day neared, I prepared physically and emotionally. I made arrangements for them to stay in a neighboring motel rather than my home, allowing me to maintain my privacy. I role-played unpleasant conversations with Dr. Mitchell to practice setting limits without becoming defensive. My folks arrived on a lovely Tuesday afternoon. I met them for lunch at a seaside restaurant, which provided a public atmosphere to help temper the initial meeting. They appeared smaller, less threatening than they did in Ohio. My father appeared to be losing confidence. My mother seemed more nervous than I remembered. Despite the coastal environment, they both dressed formally. My father in a button-down shirt and pants, and my mother in a structured dress more appropriate for church than beach eating. "This place is something else," my father observed, pointing to the turquoise lake visible through the restaurant windows. "You have done well for yourself, Natalie." The subtle emphasis on "for yourself" did not escape me, the hint that my success existed independently of family values. "Thank you," I said simply, not breaking the tense silence that ensued. My mother joined in with small conversation about their flight, the weather, and how different Florida was from Ohio. I responded pleasantly, but did not contribute to the conversation. Finally, once our meal arrived, my father spoke up about what had happened during my birthday dinner. Things got a bit heated. "You called me uneducated trash and a lowlife," I replied quietly. "You told me to get out of your house and that my money did not make me part of the family." His cheeks reddened. "I was surprised by the news about your business. It caught me off guard. I may have overreacted." Not an apology, but an excuse. "I need to understand," I said, keeping eye contact. "Was that reaction about me sharing my success, or about learning I had been helping the family financially?" "Both. Felt like you were showing off," my mother remarked. "Like you were saying you are better than us now." "I never said or thought that," I explained. "I spent years hiding my success to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. I helped financially because I could, and I wanted to support the family I love." My dad shifted uncomfortably. "Well, the way you presented it was very forward, and finding out you were behind those other things. It felt like charity we never asked for." The talk remained in this vein throughout lunch. There was no genuine apology, only explanations and attempts to diminish the gravity of the situation. The implication became clearer. They were here because my public achievement made rejecting me socially unpleasant, not because they had revised their opinion of my value. As we finished our lunch, I came to a decision. "I would like to show you my home. But first, I need to be very clear about something. I will not pretend the dinner never happened. I will not accept being called names or having my choices denigrated. If you want a relationship moving forward, it has to be based on mutual respect." They exchanged eyes, and my father nodded stiffly. "That seems reasonable." When they arrived at my beach property later that afternoon, their looks as they took in the magnificent ocean vista said it all. This tangible evidence of my progress could not be dismissed or minimized. The $20 million valuation was no longer an abstract figure, but rather reflected in beachfront real estate and elegant elegance. "This is quite something," my father said, his voice tense. "Would you like a tour?" I suggested. As I guided them through the house, pointing them the handcrafted artifacts from coastal crafted craftsmen that adorned each room, I realized something significant. Their acceptance, which I had desired for so long, no longer carried the same weight. I was proud of this home and the company that made it possible, regardless of how they reacted. This discovery was possibly the most valuable outcome of their visit, worth more than any apology they could have given. The talk that occurred after my parents' tour of the beach house was painful but important. We sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that seemed too lovely for such a heated debate. "I want to be clear about something," my father said, his tone more conciliatory than I'd ever heard. "I am sorry for what I said at my birthday. It was uncalled for, regardless of how surprised I was. While the apology was appreciated, it was tempered by a qualification that reduced its significance." His attention remained on his amazement, rather than the damage his comments had caused. "What hurt most," I said softly, "was that those words seemed to reveal how you truly see me, despite everything I have accomplished." My mother reached across the table, indicating toward my hand rather than touching it. "We have always been proud of you, Natalie. We just worried about your future without a degree." "My future is here," I declared, pointing to the property and the business that had made it possible. "I built it without a degree, but with 7 years of working harder than most people ever will. That deserves respect, not condescension." My dad shifted uncomfortably. "The business world can be fickle. Companies rise and fall overnight. We just wanted security for you. I understand that concern comes from love, I told you. But there is no perfect security in any path. Plenty of people with degrees struggle financially, while others without formal education thrive. What matters is recognizing there are multiple valid paths to success. The chat lasted several hours as the sun sank and stars appeared over the gulf. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sobbing group hug that somehow repaired decades of misunderstanding. Instead, we achieved a shaky agreement, a beginning point rather than a conclusion. Moving forward, I said as the party ended, I am open to rebuilding our relationship, but with clear boundaries. I will not accept being demeaned for my educational choices, or having my success attributed to luck rather than hard work and skill. My parents consented, but I could see my father's reluctance in his tight grin and the way he qualified his comments. My mother appeared more open, perhaps realizing for the first time the part she had played in permitting the family dynamics that had caused so much suffering. After they returned to Ohio, I reflected on my visit and the road that had brought me here. The mending process was far from complete, but great progress had been made. In the months that followed, I only spoke with my parents once a week, which grew less awkward over time. My relationship with my siblings developed differently. Claire eventually made a real apology for her role in the family dynamics, and we gradually restored a relationship based on adult friendship rather than childhood habits. David stayed distant, occasionally sending holiday pleasantries, but making no genuine attempt to understand or acknowledge the pain done. My personal recovery journey continues with frequent therapy appointments. Dr. Mitchell assisted me in seeing how family trauma had influenced my approach to business and relationships, instilling habits of seeking validation through performance and financial generosity. Success is not a substitute for self-worth, my mother informed me, and family approval cannot be purchased, no matter how much you give. This realization prompted me to set firmer limits in all interactions. I felt more comfortable talking about my successes without downplaying them. I learned to contribute out of true charity, rather than in an attempt to get acceptance. The Entrepreneurship Foundation became the focal point of my philanthropic efforts. Aside from supporting scholarships, I created a mentorship program that connects successful businesses, without traditional credentials, with talented students experiencing similar obstacles. Witnessing their development and achievement provided a deeper sense of happiness than any family approval could. My friend circle in Naples grew, forming a chosen family built on mutual respect and true connection. Our weekly reunions provided a sense of joy and belonging that I had never had in Ohio. These interactions, which I deliberately picked and maintained, showed me what it feels like to have healthy support. The beach house evolved completely over time, with each space representing my unique taste and beliefs rather than generic luxury. The garden thrived with native flora that attracted wildlife. Milo, my rescue dog, found a buddy when I adopted a second dog from the local shelter, a senior retriever named Daisy, whom everyone had overlooked. Running Coastal crafted remotely was such a success that I created flexible work practices for all employees, allowing them to work from anywhere for part of the year. Productivity rose, and employee satisfaction reached all-time highs. 1 year after moving to Florida, I organized a dinner party for my new friends. As we sat around the table on my terrace, watching dolphins frolic in the sunset waves, I thought how drastically my life had changed from that awful night at my parents' place to chosen family. Samantha toasted by raising her glass. And to having the courage to prioritize respect over obligation. The remark perfectly reflected what I had learned on my journey. Family relationships are important, but not at the expense of dignity and self-respect. Success cannot be evaluated merely by degrees or traditional accomplishments, but rather by the people we touch and the good impact we have. Most significantly, I learned that forgiving does not imply forgetting or continuing to tolerate abusive treatment. True forgiveness is an emotional process that involves releasing anger and resentment, while keeping healthy boundaries. My tale, like everyone's, is still unfolding. My connection with my parents is constantly changing, sometimes improving and sometimes reverting to old patterns. I maintain my boundaries with compassionate firmness, acknowledging that total comprehension may never be possible but refusing to compromise my self-worth in the pursuit of it. If my experience has taught me anything, it's that your worth is not defined by other people's impressions, especially those clouded by obsolete beliefs and expectations. Success manifests itself in a variety of ways, often unexpectedly, and the most painful rejections can lead to the most true and gratifying future roots. Have you ever had to choose between meeting family expectations and following your own path? Did you confront criticism for your unique approach to success? Please share your experience in the comment section below. If this story spoke to you, remember to like and subscribe, and then share it with others who may be dealing with similar familial situations. Thank you for listening. Take care. Good luck. My influencer sister asked me to delay my pregnancy so I wouldn't overshadow her wedding. Days later, her fiancé left, and her career is over. My sister has always been Sienna. I honestly don't know how to describe her correctly. You'd have to see, hear, and live with her to truly understand what I'm talking about. She is the youngest of 3 daughters and has been treated as if she were a princess since childhood. That is the ideal recipe for a real diva, someone who was born with the belief that the world should revolve around them. When Sienna cried as a child, her entire family's plans had to change. If she desired something, she would find a way to acquire it. Whether it was my birthday or our parents' anniversary, I didn't mind because I've always been self-sufficient. I did my thing, and she did hers. Sienna has always appreciated huge gestures, extravagant birthday parties, concept vacations, and more recently, live streaming with tens of thousands of viewers. She is now an influencer who creates lifestyle and wedding material, so everything in her life is broadcast with beautiful filters on TikTok and Instagram. Sienna sees life as a film, and she is, of course, the star. The majority of it is harmless, and in some cases, enjoyable. But there are times when she crosses the line, and this time she went too far. Last year, she became engaged to Ryan, a young doctor who is popular among everyone. Their engagement celebration was held in a Napa vineyard, classic Sienna, twinkle lights, an outdoor reception, imported flowers, and a film team following her around to vlog on YouTube. I was 3 months pregnant at the time. My husband Eric and I had meticulously planned and were overjoyed to be pregnant. We hadn't disclosed it publicly, only to relatives. Sienna was one of the first people I told. There was no reason to keep it a secret, and if Mom found out I hadn't told Sienna, it would have been a big deal. I imagined she'd be pleased for me. She smiled and said, "Congratulations," but it didn't seem genuine. As the celebration continued, Sienna took me aside into a quiet corner to speak discreetly. And that's when everything began to unravel. She took me to the back of the vineyard, where the film crew was taking a break. Nearby was a pink LED-lit koi pond, which was one of the visual highlights for the engagement video. She began with her typical spiel about how the wedding had to be exactly flawless, and that it was the most important day of her life. Sienna prioritized being live-streamed over who she was marrying. I was so used to Sienna's self-centered monologues that I didn't pay close attention at first. She discussed the wedding clothing, how the guests' skin tones had to fit the pastel motif, and the engagement video's TikTok engagement numbers. I just stood there and nodded pleasantly. Then she abruptly turned the discussion to my pregnancy. "I'm very happy for you," Sienna remarked, looking at the camera waiting in the tent. "A baby is wonderful, but what if it takes the focus away from my wedding day?" I blinked, assuming I had misheard. She continued, as if recommending a cake taste. "I mean, you can have a baby any time, but I only have one wedding, and yours is happening around the same time. I'm worried people will talk more about the baby than my dress." I had no words for her. She raised her chin and spoke gently, as if recommending a menu item. "I simply wondered if you could postpone the pregnancy. I mean, you are young." Sienna smiled gently and added, "Think of it as a little wedding gift. You can have another child any time, and I only get one wedding, at least as planned." It felt like a slap in the face. She was seriously asking me to get an abortion so I wouldn't ruin her visual frame on her sponsored, live-streamed wedding. In that moment, I realized I wasn't dealing with a childish little sister, but with a grown woman who was utterly serious about asking her biological sister to give up an unborn child so she could remain the undisputed star of her lavish, sponsored, live-stream wedding. I just patted her shoulder with a fake laugh. "That joke's a bit much," and walked away. But, in my heart, I knew she wasn't joking. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. At first I convinced myself Sienna must have been tipsy, stressed from her wedding planner quitting, or exhausted from the glare of stage lights. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something was wrong. She wasn't drunk. She knew exactly what she was saying, and, worst of all, she thought she was being reasonable. Eric noticed my tenseness and asked what was wrong. I hadn't planned to tell him, but I eventually did. He went silent, then whispered, "She's lost her mind." I've never seen Eric so angry, not even during heated arguments with his old boss, or when our contractor messed up our kitchen, but this time, he stood pacing in the living room, his hands balled into fists, ready to strike a wall. "Why didn't you tell me right then?" he asked, his voice shaking with rage. I merely shrugged. Perhaps I couldn't absorb it yet, or maybe I was worried that speaking it out loud would make it real. We decided to stay away from Sienna for a time. I canceled the bridesmaid dress fitting she had scheduled and ignored texts from her assistant asking about soft maternity dress options for a pregnant guest. Sienna never mentioned her earlier request again, but kept dropping not-so-subtle hints via Instagram DMs. You still haven't posted your pregnancy online, right? Maybe I'll wait till after the wedding to avoid losing the spotlight. Or, if you want to wear something really loose to hide your belly, just say so. My stylist can help. She spoke as if she was doing me a favor, a sweet gesture from a renowned younger sister. But it was evident what she truly wanted, for me to remain silent, cover my bump, and fade away from the camera's gaze. I felt increasingly suffocated as time went. Sienna was not simply selfish, she used people as props in her show. Meanwhile, I was carrying a small life inside me, for the first time feeling completely linked to something larger than myself. And she was solely concerned about views, sponsors, and not having her wedding photobombed by her sister's pregnancy belly. I began to worry how far she would go if I kept quiet. I tried to shove it out of my thoughts, telling myself I was overreacting. Perhaps Sienna was simply overwhelmed with wedding stress and lost her grasp for a moment. But every time I thought that she had actually begged me to have an abortion merely to keep her wedding on brand, I got a shiver down my spine. Eric, on the other hand, could not contain his rage. He said, if anyone else said that to you, I'd block them and never speak to them again. But this was my sister, whom I used to cradle as a newborn, shield from bullies at school, and stay up all night assisting with her college presentations. And suddenly she regarded the child I was carrying as a fashion faux pas that needed to be removed from the photograph. Less than a week later, everything began to unravel, and not because of me, but because of Sienna herself. She shared a light ranting video on her Instagram story, loosely referring to selfish family members, individuals who don't support others' careers, and those who believe they're the center of the universe simply because they are pregnant. I was stunned. She intended to put her side of the story online first. I hadn't informed anyone in the family yet, but the video spread quickly. One of my close friends, Maya, who follows Sienna out of curiosity, emailed me the story and said, "She's talking about you, right? This is getting out of hand." Maya anonymously shared the incident on Reddit. My influencer sister asked me to get an abortion so I wouldn't overshadow her wedding. The message went viral overnight, with thousands of upvotes and over 5,000 comments, the most of which were surprised, indignant, or simply in amazement that someone could think that way. People were dissecting, debating, and spreading it everywhere. Sienna called me the next morning, not to apologize, but to scream into the phone, accusing me of betraying her, damaging the image she had constructed over 3 years, and that businesses were putting collaborations on hold as a result of the post. I remained silent throughout the call. After that, I said a single thing. I didn't write that post, but if you think I did, maybe deep down you know who actually did something wrong. I hung up, not relieved, but not as hurt as before. Perhaps the anguish had subsided, and all that remained was a cold, crushing disappointment. She wasn't remorseful, she was just upset she had been exposed. I expected it to end with social media, but drama never stops. It went viral just a few days after the Reddit post was made. Sienna's brand partner, a clean cosmetics company, secretly took her name from their website. A gossip page that exposes influencers reposted Sienna's old tale with the description, "Someone should remind her that being a decent human is also a good content concept." The comments were a nightmare for Sienna, with people phoning to cancel her, naming sponsors, and demanding they break relations. I still hadn't spoken to our parents, partially because I didn't know where to start, and partly because I was too tired to explain. But, in the end, Ryan revealed everything, not me. Ryan, Sienna's fiancé, contacted me one afternoon as Eric and I were folding baby clothes. His voice was quiet, almost frightening. "Hey Clara, can I ask you something?" I took a break. I'd never had a true one-on-one chat with Ryan, other than brief hellos at family functions. "Sienna says you made it all up, that you're jealous and trying to ruin the wedding, but I don't really believe her. I need to hear it from you." I explained everything carefully. There are no embellishments. I didn't need to dramatize anything. The truth was horrible enough. I just spoke it as it was. Ryan was silent for a long time. Then he moaned, clearly fatigued. "She told me you two had a little disagreement over a party dress." His voice fell. "But this isn't about a dress, this is about character." After that phone conversation, I knew nothing would be the same. A few days later, my mother called, her voice severe. "What did you say to Ryan?" I tried to remain calm, but she quickly went on me. You know how sensitive she is about being on camera. Why would you make things harder for your sister? She lives for her image. And you? You're pregnant. I just said one thing. I'm pregnant, Mom. I'm not killing my baby just to make my sister look better on camera. And then I hung up. That night, Eric hugged me tightly. He didn't say anything, but lovingly caressed my hair while I cried onto his shoulder. I sobbed for my little sister, who had long since vanished. I sobbed for a family I could no longer recognize. And I cried because I knew the drama was only beginning. How Sienna began to lose control of the online narrative. She responded just how I expected. By playing the victim. She recorded a TikTok in her typical get ready with me style, but her voice was unsteady, her eyes unfocused, and mascara streaked down her cheeks. Hey everyone, someone really close to me made up lies just to ruin the wedding. I've dreamed of my whole life, she murmured, her voice quivering as she applied foundation onto her face. They don't understand how stressful it is to be an influencer. I just asked them to maybe consider postponing a few small things, and now everyone's turned on me. The video went viral within hours, but instead of eliciting sympathy, it exacerbated the situation. Former supporters of Sienna began applauding back. They brought up old stories about how she once shaded a friend online, requested that someone remove wedding images that clashed with her wardrobe concept, or pushed a close friend to reschedule a birthday party that interfered with her filming schedule. A fact-checking fan page even collated previous recordings and descriptions, including one in which Sienna allegedly ordered a stylist to Photoshop a baby out of a family vacation photo from last year. The deeper they dug, the more skeletons emerged. Things that had previously seemed like false gossip were now receipts. Sienna's own statements, clips, and posts. When a former close friend came out, alleging Sienna had urged her to get an abortion in college to avoid jeopardizing her senior fashion project, the reaction finally drove her away. A big brand announced the end of their partnership with Sienna via an Instagram story. 2 more beauty brands followed suit, with a detox drink firm and the wedding florist sponsor cutting connections due to conflicting ideals. I began receiving texts from family. Did you really write that post? Why did you let this go so far? Sienna's being destroyed. I didn't answer because truly, I didn't need to do anything. Sienna had done everything herself. Ryan stayed mute. I knew he was thinking. And Sienna started spiraling. She erased dozens of Instagram postings, unfollowed brands with which she previously worked, and began posting cryptic comments such as, "If they don't stand by you at your worst, they don't deserve you at your best." But this time, no one applauded. There were no words of comfort, no sorrowful emoticons, just a wall of silence and an unmistakable sense of humiliation. I have yet to hear from Ryan following the online maelstrom. Sienna continued to pretend, crying on Instagram and attempting to alter the story to portray herself as the victim. However, anyone with eyes, ears, and a shred of common sense could see who the true sufferer was. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Eric received a message from Ryan. "Can we meet for a bit?" "Nothing about Sienna. I just need to talk to someone normal." The two met at a small coffee shop near Ryan's hospital. Eric told me Ryan appeared exhausted, as if he had just recovered from a long illness. His clothing was crumpled, and his eyes were rimmed with tiredness. He sat there, clutching his coffee cup as if it were anchoring him to reality. "I used to think Sienna was just a little self-centered," Ryan remarked softly. "We met back when she only had a few thousand followers. She was sweet, full of energy, but the closer we got to the wedding, the more I realized I don't even know who she is anymore." Eric remained quiet, allowing him to talk. "At first, I thought maybe your sister misunderstood something," she said. "But now, everything lines up. Not just the abortion thing, it's how she reacted. She's not sorry for hurting people. She's just mad she got exposed." Ryan confessed he had planned the proposal for a full year, booked the vineyard, picked a meaningful date, and hired the film crew, thinking it would be a treasured memory, but he didn't realize the woman he loved saw love as a live stream event where engagement and sponsorships mattered more than emotions. He claimed Sienna had become increasingly controlling. She wanted to know his daily itinerary, requested his phone password, and forced him to unfollow female co-workers in order to maintain their ideal couple image. "I'm not sure I want to marry her anymore," Ryan confessed, his eyes distant. "I haven't said it out loud yet, but if I have to live a lie forever, I'd rather cancel the wedding." That night, Eric told me everything over dinner. I did not feel happy. I did not feel vindicated. I just felt sad. Sad that Ryan took so long to realize who Sienna truly was. It's unfortunate that something so sacred as marriage has turned into a marketing pitch. Above all, I was relieved that Ryan was finally waking up. Maybe not everything was fully broken yet, but Sienna's fairy tale wedding veneer had crumbled, and nothing could be done to repair it. Following our conversation with Ryan, Eric and I decided it was time to speak with the family, not to intensify the situation, but to break the silence Sienna was employing to control everyone. I called my mother, sitting up straight on the couch and bracing myself for a rough talk. She picked up instantly, her voice already tinged with mistrust. "Clara, what did you say to Ryan that caused him to postpone the wedding?" I bit my lip and took a big breath. I just told him the truth. There was stillness on the other end, then a gentle, bitter chuckle. "The truth, huh? You always think you're right. But did you ever stop to think about how your sister feels? She's being attacked from all sides online. Her wedding's falling apart. Her career is affected, all because of your so-called truth." I closed my eyes and forced my voice to remain quiet. "Did you know she asked me to get an abortion?" There was silence. "Sienna's not just insensitive, Mom. She's toxic. I didn't go online and drag her name through the mud, but she went on video saying I'm selfish, saying my pregnancy is ruining her life. She's acting like the world owes her a perfect wedding." My mother did not respond. But I knew she understood, even if she didn't say so. What startled me more were the messages that followed from additional relatives. My aunt, my mother's older sister, called me and said, "Clara, I heard about everything. And you're not the first." She told me that a few years ago, Sienna urged a pregnant cousin, Isla, not to attend a friend's wedding because her baby belly didn't match the aesthetic. Isla grieved for days but never told anybody because she was frightened of causing conflict in her family. Another younger cousin wrote, "Thank you for speaking up. She once told me I couldn't go public with my boyfriend because he didn't fit the bestie group brand she was curating." That's when I discovered I wasn't the only one. I was the first one who didn't remain silent. Perhaps this is why people finally started talking. The truth began to surface like bubbles underwater, revealing previously hidden stories with surprising clarity. The saddest part? The only one who refused to look in the mirror was Sienna herself. Sienna had always believed that she had complete control over everything. In her opinion, if the filter was correct, the caption was touching enough, and the lighting was perfect, any mess could be transformed into a tear-jerking story. But this time, no one mourned for her, and there was no setup powerful enough to obscure the truth. As corporations continued to openly suspend agreements, Sienna changed tactics. She started posting healing journey videos, complete with mournful piano music, flickering candles, and the phrase, "Sometimes the ones closest to us hurt us the most." She claimed to meditate, read self-help books, and let go of turmoil to focus on inner peace before ending the video with an affiliate link to a discounted yoga mat. However, the internet was no longer as easily exploited. Former loyal fans now mocked her. Letting go of negativity with a 15% discount code. One comment with over 12,000 likes stated, "Sienna needs therapy, not more followers," another user said. The more she attempted to save her image, the more she became a punchline. Ryan remained utterly silent. He did not post, defend, or take sides, and his quiet said louder than anything else. Then a week before the wedding, Sienna shared a photo of a bridal bouquet with the remark, "Whether people stay or leave, I'll still love myself the most." The responses were half-hearted attempts at encouragement from her few remaining pals. "Stay strong, girl, you deserve a happy ending." But I knew, and perhaps Sienna did too, that it was finished. Ryan sent me a single message that night. "Thank you for not staying silent like everyone else." I did not respond. I did not need to. Word spread immediately. Ryan had moved out of their apartment, taken his bags, canceled the wedding hotel room, and told the wedding planner, "Services are no longer needed." Sienna later shared a 7-second video to her story, which left viewers breathless. She sat at her vanity, eyes puffy and staring straight into the camera. Her voice. "Everyone's left me. There's no caption, music, or promo code." Sienna was underperforming for the first time. And for the first time, I watched her actually break down, not because of a wedding or a loss of followers, but because her own shadow had long since engulfed whatever was real inside her. Sienna's wedding did not happen. There was no live feed, no couture outfit, and no first look video during golden hour. All that left was a brief Instagram post. "Due to personal reasons, the event is postponed indefinitely." She did not tag Ryan. She did not explain. For the first time in years, Sienna's account was silent. There is no background music, laughter, or beautifully sculpted smiles next to pink cocktails, only a hollow stillness. I didn't feel joyful. Honestly, I felt relieved but not vindicated since, at the end of the day, she is still my sister. And a part of me still suffers when I think about the little girl who used to pursue me around the yard, wailing after a tumble. The same little sister who would sneak handwritten messages under my pillow after a fight with our parents. But the same little girl grew up in a virtual world where every glance and heart reaction was more important than reality. And she gave up everything, family, love, even her integrity, to cling to a transient mirage known as the perfect image. I kept my distance, no calls or texts. My mother called me again after everything, her voice softer than usual. I think maybe I spoiled her too much. I didn't respond, not out of rage, but because sometimes silence is the clearest response. Meanwhile, Eric remained by my side, never missing a prenatal checkup. He altered his schedule, making time to take me for walks, play music for the baby, and read to my belly. All the little things that felt so warm and grounded. In the midst of the chaos, I felt more at ease than ever. 8 weeks later, I gave birth to a stunning baby boy. We named him Elijah, which means, "My God is my strength," and he truly is the light in the storm, keeping me anchored when everything else around me came apart. I did not invite Sienna to the hospital. She sent just one message. "Congratulations." I don't know what else to say. I didn't respond, not out of bitterness, but because some cracks, once deep enough, shouldn't be repaired with too late apologies. Maybe someday she will actually change. Who knows? But, until that day arrives, I'll keep my son away from the drama, and from anyone whose love is always conditional. My parents threatened to raise my rent unless I was my sister's free nanny. They didn't know I'd vanish overnight, leaving them drowning in the mess. I'm just a regular 25-year-old who worked hard to graduate college and land my first job as an elementary school teacher. It's not a high-paying gig, but I love working with kids, so it's worth it. Still, money's tight, especially when you're starting out. That's why I've been living with my parents, in the same suburban house I grew up in. It's not the most exciting setup, but it's practical. They charge me rent, a reasonable amount, as my dad likes to say. And I buy my own groceries. Plus, I chip in with chores like mowing the lawn, fixing stuff around the house, and even cleaning out the garage last summer when Dad hurt his back. It's not glamorous, but it's temporary. My plan was to stay for a couple of years, save some money, and then find a place of my own. Simple, right? Well, it was simple until my older sister Martha re-entered the picture. Martha is 32 and, how do I put this nicely, she's never exactly been the responsible type. Growing up, she was the golden child. I don't know if it was because she was the firstborn, or if our parents just have a soft spot for her, but she could do no wrong in their eyes. She dropped out of college not once, but twice. The first time, it was because she didn't feel inspired. The second time, she said the professors were too demanding. She's never held down a job for more than a few months. Every time something didn't go her way, she'd quit and come up with some excuse about how it wasn't her fault. Our parents always bailed her out. Late on rent? They'd pay it. Car broke down? They'd cover the repair. Got a speeding ticket? Mom would write the check while muttering about how the police target young women. Meanwhile, I was scrubbing toilets at a diner to save up for college and taking out loans to cover tuition. Martha had been living on her own for the past couple of years, or so I thought. Turns out, she'd been bouncing between different apartments, constantly behind on rent, and leaning on our parents to keep her afloat. I didn't know any of this until she showed up one day and casually mentioned she was pregnant. Now, I'm not here to judge anyone for their life choices, but let's just say Martha wasn't exactly in a stable situation. The father of the baby was some guy she'd been seeing for a couple of months, and from what I could gather, he wasn't thrilled about the whole surprise baby thing. He pretty much vanished as soon as she told him. You'd think this would be Martha's wake-up call, right? Like maybe this was the moment she'd realize she needed to get her life together. But no. Instead, she ran straight to Mom and Dad, who immediately went into fix-it mode. Within a week, they'd started renovating the basement to turn it into a little apartment for her. They even put in a kitchenette. I didn't ask where the money was coming from, but I overheard Mom mention dipping into their retirement savings. I tried to stay out of it, because honestly, it wasn't my business. If they wanted to throw money at Martha, that was their choice. But the thing is, I could already see the writing on the wall. My parents have this way of dragging everyone else into Martha's problems. It's like they think we all have to band together to help her out, no matter how much of a mess she's made. At first, I told myself it wouldn't affect me. The basement was being turned into Martha's little apartment, so she'd have her own space. I figured she'd move in, do her thing, and I'd go on with my life. Sure, It was a little frustrating to watch them bend over backward for her again, but I tried not to dwell on it. That mindset worked for about 2 months. Then, little things started piling up. First, Mom began making comments about how I should spend more time with Martha since she was going through so much. Never mind that I was working full-time and coming home exhausted most days. Then came the subtle guilt trips. Mom would say things like, "You know Martha doesn't have anyone else to lean on right now. It's so hard being pregnant and single." She'd say this while looking directly at me, like I was supposed to magically solve all of Martha's problems. Dad wasn't any, he'd find ways to work Martha into every conversation. "You should be grateful for everything you have, Abby," he'd say while passing the salt at dinner. "Not everyone's as lucky as you." Lucky? I was barely scraping by, trying to build a career and save money. Meanwhile, Martha was getting a fully renovated apartment handed to her, along with endless emotional and financial support. But things hit another level when I overheard a conversation between Mom and Dad one night. They were in the living room, and I was in the kitchen making tea. "She's going to need a lot of help once the baby comes," Mom said. "Of course," Dad replied. "We'll all pitch in." "All?" Mom asked. "Well, you, me, and Abby," Dad said, like it was obvious. I nearly dropped my mug. They hadn't said anything to me about this plan, but it was clear they'd already decided I was going to be part of it. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know the specifics yet, but I could tell they were cooking up something that was going to pull me into Martha's chaos, whether I liked it or not. The uneasy feeling only grew when Martha started coming over more often. She'd flop onto the couch, complaining about how hard it was to be pregnant and how unfair it was that her ex had bailed. She'd make little comments about how lucky I was to have a steady job and no kids to worry about. I bit my tongue every time because I didn't want to start an argument, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, why does this always fall on me? By the time dinner rolled around that night, I had a sinking feeling that something was coming. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. When we all sat down for dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. You know when everyone's acting a little too casual, like they're all in on a secret except you? That's how it felt. Mom and Dad were chatting about random stuff, something about the neighbor's new fence, and Martha was just scrolling on her phone. It felt forced, like they were waiting for the right moment to drop something on me. Dinner was spaghetti, which is always my dad's go-to. We need to have a family talk meal. I don't know why. It's not like spaghetti makes bad news any easier to swallow. I tried to just focus on my plate and not read into things too much, but then, about halfway through the meal, Mom cleared her throat. "So, we've been thinking," she started, glancing at Dad. I froze. Nothing good ever came from those words. "With Martha moving back home, she's going to need some help," Mom continued, her tone overly sweet. "Help with what exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Dad jumped in before she could answer. "With the baby, of course. Martha's got a lot on her plate right now, and it's going to be hard for her to manage everything on her own." I glanced over at Martha, who was still scrolling on her phone like this conversation had nothing to do with her. She didn't even look up. "Okay, but what does that have to do with me?" I asked, setting my fork down. My parents exchanged one of those looks, like they were trying to figure out how to phrase whatever they were about to say. "Well," Mom began, "you're already living here, and you're so good with kids, being a teacher and all. We thought it made sense for you to help with babysitting." "Help?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Dad nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, just keep an eye on the baby while Martha gets back on her feet. It wouldn't be full-time or anything, just when you're home." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to babysit a newborn on top of working full-time?" "Well, you're home by 3 most days," Mom'd out. "And you're not paying market rent," Dad added, as if that was somehow relevant. I stared at them, trying to process what they were asking. They weren't just asking for a little help, they were expecting me to take on a whole second job for free. "Wait, let me get this straight," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You want me to come home from teaching all day and then take care of Martha's baby?" Mom sighed, like I was being difficult on purpose. "It's not like that, Abby. We're all going to pitch in." "All," I repeated. "Yes," Dad said. "We're all family, and family helps each other." At that point, Martha finally looked up from her phone. "Wow, Abby," she said, smirking. "I didn't realize helping your sister was such a big deal for you." I felt my hands tighten into fists under the table. I didn't want to snap, but the entitlement in her voice was unbearable. "It's not about that," I said. I have my own life, my own job. I can't just drop everything to babysit. You're being selfish, Mom said, her tone sharp. Martha's going through a really hard time right now. The least you can do is help her out. Why is it my responsibility to fix her choices? I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. She's 32 years old. She's not a kid anymore. Martha gave me the, "Are you kidding me?" Look, that's enough, Dad said, his tone firm. We're all in this together, whether you like it or not. You're living under our roof, and we expect you to contribute. Family? I said. I pay rent, I buy my own groceries, I help with chores. How is that not enough? The room went silent for a moment, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Martha just sat there, looking smug, like she'd already won. Well, Mom finally said, if you're not willing to help, maybe we need to rethink your living arrangement. My stomach dropped. Are you threatening to kick me out? Of course not, Mom said quickly. But if you're not willing to contribute more, maybe we need to discuss raising your rent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd been doing everything I could to be a good tenant, if you could even call it that. And now they were trying to guilt me into taking on responsibilities that weren't mine. You're seriously going to do this? I asked, my voice shaking. You're going to punish me for not wanting to be Martha's free nanny. It's not punishment, Dad said. It's about being part of the family, I said, standing up from the table. It's about you two enabling Martha, like you always have, and now you're trying to drag me into it. Don't talk about your sister like that, Mom snapped. I'm done, I said, turning toward the stairs. You want to help Martha, fine, but leave me out of it. I stormed upstairs and slammed the door to my room, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd always known my parents favored Martha, but this was on a whole new level. It felt like it was about control. They wanted to keep me under their roof so they could manipulate me into doing whatever they needed. The thing that really stuck with me was how smug Martha looked through the whole conversation. She barely said a word, just sat there scrolling on her phone, like none of it was her problem. And I guess in her mind, it wasn't. Mom and Dad were already bending over backward to accommodate her, and now they were trying to drag me into it too. I don't think I slept more than a couple of hours that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said, but didn't. By the time my alarm went off the next morning, I was still angry, but mostly I felt stuck. I couldn't just up and leave. I mean, I'd thought about it, packing up my stuff and finding my own place. But it wasn't that simple. I was only a few months into my teaching job and still trying to save up. Rent in the area was insane, and I couldn't afford to live alone on my salary. For the next few days things were tense around the house. Mom and Dad were clearly mad at me, but instead of talking about it, they started with the passive-aggressive comments. Must be nice to have so much free time after work, Mom said one evening as I walked through the door. Yeah, some people don't have that luxury, Dad added, not even looking up from his newspaper. I ignored them and went straight to my room. At this point, I wasn't interested in arguing. I knew anything I said would just escalate things, and I didn't have the energy for it. Martha, meanwhile, was living her best life. She wasn't even officially moved in yet, but she was at the house almost every day, taking over the living room with her stuff and acting like she already owned the place. She'd leave her shoes by the couch, her purse on the dining table, and random shopping bags scattered around like it was no big deal. One night, I came home to find her lounging on the couch with a bowl of ice cream, watching some reality show. She didn't even acknowledge me when I walked in. She glanced up, gave me a half-hearted hey, and went back to her show. I stood there for a second, waiting for her to say something else, an apology maybe, or even just a thanks for not flipping out about the situation. But nothing. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and noticed that half of my groceries were gone. The bread I bought, gone. The yogurt, gone. Even my leftovers from the night before were missing. Did you eat my food? I asked, walking back into the living room. Martha didn't even look up. Mom said I could. She mumbled between bites of ice cream. She's not the one who paid for it, I snapped. Martha finally turned to face me, rolling her eyes. Chill out, Abby. It's just food. It's my food, I said, my voice rising. If you want groceries, go buy your own. Geez, you don't have to be such a drama queen, Martha said, setting her bowl down on the coffee table. You're acting like I stole your car or something. I didn't even know what to say. I just stood there, fuming, while Martha grabbed her phone and started texting someone, completely ignoring me again. I wanted to yell, to tell her how entitled and selfish she was being, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Martha had spent her entire life getting away with this kind of behavior because Mom and Dad let her. And now they were trying to make me part of the problem. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. "You need to apologize to your sister," she said, her tone stern. "For what?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "For making her feel unwelcome," Mom said, crossing her arms. "She's going through so much right now, and the last thing she needs is you being difficult." "Are you serious?" I said, turning to face her. "She ate all my food and acted like it was no big deal. How is that my fault?" Mom sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's just food, Abby. You can always buy more." "That's not the point," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The point is that she doesn't respect anyone's boundaries, and you're letting her get away with it." "Boundaries," Mom said, practically scoffing. "This is her home now too. You need to learn how to share." At that moment, I realized there was no reasoning with her. Mom wasn't interested in hearing my side of things. She just wanted me to fall in line and do what was best for the family. Over the next week, things got worse. Mom and Dad started dropping hints that they were going to raise my rent if I didn't step up. Martha began moving more of her stuff into the house, filling the basement with furniture and boxes. She even started using my bathroom, because apparently the one downstairs wasn't good enough. I tried to keep my distance, but it felt like no matter what I did, they were all determined to drag me into their chaos. One night, I came home to find Dad in the living room holding what looked like a budget spreadsheet. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. I hesitated, but eventually sat on the edge of the couch, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "We've been looking at the numbers," Dad said, tapping the paper with his pen. "And with Martha moving in, expenses are going up. We think it's only fair for you to contribute more." "You're already charging me rent," I said. "How much more do you want?" Dad shrugged. "We're still figuring that out, but if you're not willing to help with the baby, this seems like the best solution." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were literally trying to use my rent as leverage to force me into babysitting. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing up. "I'm already paying more than enough for what I get here. If you want me to leave, just say so." "No one's asking you to leave," Dad said quickly. "We're just asking you to do your part." "My part?" I repeated. "You mean Martha's part?" Dad opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out of the room and straight up to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. At that point, I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep living in a house where my boundaries didn't matter and my parents saw me as nothing more than free labor. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to get out. That thought stayed with me, growing louder every time Martha waltzed through the house like she owned it, or Mom and Dad tried to guilt-trip me into helping. But deciding to leave and actually pulling it off were two very different things. I didn't have much saved yet. Not enough to comfortably afford my own place. And the idea of suddenly uprooting my life felt overwhelming. Still, I knew staying wasn't an option. If I let them push me into being Martha's backup parent now, it would never stop. They'd just keep piling more and more onto me until I was stuck. I didn't want to wake up one day, 5 years later, still living in that house, miserable and resentful. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down with my laptop. I opened a spreadsheet where I kept track of my budget: rent, groceries, gas, student loans. I wasn't great at saving, but I'd been putting aside a little every month. I added everything up and realized I could manage a move if I found somewhere affordable and cut back on extras for a while. The timing couldn't have been better. My coworker Alicia had mentioned a few weeks ago that she was looking for a roommate. I hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now it felt like a lifeline. I texted her, "Hey, is that roommate thing still an option?" She replied almost immediately, "Yep, still looking. Why, you interested?" "Yeah, maybe. Can we talk after work?" Alicia's response was short and sweet. "Of course." That afternoon, I stayed late at school, waiting until the halls were quiet before heading to Alicia's classroom. She was sitting at her desk, grading papers. "What's up?" she asked, looking up from her stack of essays. I hesitated for a second, unsure how much to share. Finally, I said, "I'm thinking about moving out of my parents' place. They're making things complicated." Alicia nodded like she understood without me having to explain. "The offer is still open," she said. "It's not a big place, but it's clean, and we'd split everything down the middle. Rent's $800 a month, utilities included." That was a little higher than I'd been hoping for, but it was doable. When would you need someone to move in? I asked. Yesterday, she joked, then added, but seriously, anytime. If you're in, the room's yours. I told her I'd let her know by the end of the week, but in my head, I'd already made up my mind. This was my way out. Then I had to figure out how to leave without creating even more drama. If my parents caught wind of my plan too soon, I knew they'd try to sabotage it. They'd guilt me, argue with me, maybe even go as far as raising my rent immediately to stop me from saving anything. So I kept quiet. I started packing little by little, focusing on the essentials, clothes, personal items, and anything I couldn't afford to replace. I stored everything in the trunk of my car, hiding it under a blanket in case anyone got curious. At the same time, I started documenting everything, just in case. I took pictures of my room, my furniture, my electronics, anything that could potentially become a point of contention later. I knew from experience that Martha had a way of forgetting what belonged to whom, and I wasn't about to lose my stuff in the chaos of leaving. One night, while everyone was asleep, I printed out a letter formally giving my 30-day notice. I'd done some research online and found out that even though I wasn't technically a tenant in the legal sense, it was still smart to have everything in writing. The last thing I wanted was for them to accuse me of bailing without warning. I didn't sleep much that night, constantly checking the clock and listening for any noises that might mean someone was awake. Finally, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I slid the envelope under the door to my parents' bedroom. The reaction was immediate. By the time I got home from work that day, Mom and Dad were waiting for me in the living room. "What's this?" Dad asked, holding up the letter like it was some kind of personal attack. "It's my notice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're really doing this?" Mom asked, her voice already shaky. "Yes," I said firmly. "I found a place, and I'll be moving out by the end of the month." "You can't just leave," Mom said. "What about Martha? What about the baby?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Martha and the baby aren't my responsibility. I've done everything I can to help around here, but I can't keep living like this." "What is wrong with you?" Dad said, his voice rising. "You weren't stubborn like this before. We've given you so much, letting you live here, helping you get on your feet. And this is how you repay us." I clenched my fists, biting back the urge to yell. "I pay rent," I said through gritted teeth. "I buy my own food. I've been responsible for myself since the day I graduated. I'm not a kid anymore, and I'm not your backup plan for Martha." Mom started crying, which didn't surprise me. She always cried when things didn't go her way. "How can you do this to us?" she sobbed. "To your sister?" I didn't say anything. I knew there was no point. They weren't going to listen, and I wasn't going to change my mind. The days that followed were some of the most awkward of my life. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, except to throw in the occasional guilt trip. Martha acted like nothing had changed, continuing to take over the house as if it was already hers. One night, I came home to find that she'd moved more of her stuff into the basement, stacking boxes on top of the couch and cramming clothes into the closet. It was like she was marking her territory, claiming every inch of space she could. "Hope you don't mind," she said when I walked in. I didn't respond. I just went upstairs and closed the door to my room, ignoring the knot of anger growing in my chest. In the final days before my move, I doubled down on my preparations. I packed the last of my essentials, checked and rechecked my budget, and made plans with Elysia to pick up the keys. Everything was falling into place, but I still felt a gnawing sense of unease. The hardest part came the morning I officially moved out. I'd arranged for Elysia to swing by with her car, and we were going to load up the last of my stuff before heading to her apartment. I thought I'd timed it perfectly, early enough that Martha would still be sleeping and Mom and Dad would be too distracted with their morning routines to bother me. Of course, nothing ever goes that smoothly in my family. I was halfway through hauling boxes out to my car when I heard the familiar sound of my dad's slippers shuffling down the hallway. He appeared at the top of the stairs. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I didn't stop moving. "I told you I'm leaving today," I said, grabbing another box and heading for the door. "You can't just sneak out like this," he snapped, following me outside. "We're a family, Abby. Are you abandoning your own family?" I set the box down in the trunk of my car and turned to face him. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm choosing to live my own life. There's a difference." Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could say anything, Mom appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed and tears already streaming down her face. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Yes, I said, standing my ground. What about Martha? She sobbed. What about the baby? I sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. Mom, I've told you before, Martha and the baby aren't my problem. I can't keep sacrificing my own life to fix her mistakes. That set her off. How dare you talk about your sister like that, she cried, her voice rising. She's doing the best she can. Is she? I shot back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's just waiting for everyone else to do the work for her. At that moment, Martha emerged from the basement, looking disheveled but wide awake. She took one look at the scene unfolding in the driveway and smirked. Don't worry, Mom, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. If Abby wants to be selfish, let her. We don't need her anyway. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to snap back. Instead, I turned to Alicia, who had just pulled up in her car. Let's get this done, I said, ignoring the chaos behind me. Alicia gave me a sympathetic look and started helping me load the rest of my stuff into the cars. My parents continued to argue in the background, throwing out every guilt trip they could think of. Who's going to help us now? Dad shouted. How can you be so heartless? Mom wailed. Martha, meanwhile, leaned against the doorframe, watching the whole thing like it was some kind of live performance for her entertainment. By the time we were done loading everything, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I stood in the driveway, taking one last look at the house I'd called home for so many years. It should have been a bittersweet moment, but all I felt was relief. With that, I started the engine and drove away, Alicia following close behind. The relief I felt when I pulled into Alicia's apartment complex was immediate. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, drama-free. Alicia helped me carry everything inside, and within an hour, I was unpacked and settled into my new room. We sat on the couch afterward, chatting about work. It felt normal, like a glimpse of the life I'd been missing while stuck in the middle of my family's chaos. But that peace only lasted about 2 hours. My phone started buzzing non-stop, calls, texts, voicemails. It was my parents, my aunts, my cousins. Apparently my mom had already spread the news that I'd abandoned the family, and everyone had something to say about it. Abby, how could you do this to your sister? One voicemail from my Aunt Carol started. She's pregnant and vulnerable. Don't you care about family? Selfish doesn't even begin to describe you. Another text from a cousin read. The worst part was Martha's social media posts. She'd gone full victim mode, posting pictures of her baby bump with captions like, "Some people would rather run away than help their own family. At least my baby will know what real love looks like." I blocked her immediately. It was infuriating, but I refused to let it pull me back in. I reminded myself that this was exactly why I'd left. To escape the manipulation and drama that always came with being part of my family. The next week at work, things got even weirder. My mom showed up at the school during my lunch break, crying and begging to talk to me. She was in full meltdown mode, talking about how I destroyed the family, and how Martha was falling apart without me there. My principal had to step in and ask her to leave, which was mortifying. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact with everyone, knowing they were probably wondering what kind of family drama I was caught up in. But that incident actually worked in my favor. I thought I was done with the house and all the chaos it came with. But of course, life isn't that simple. About 2 weeks later, I realized I'd left some important documents behind. A file with my teaching certification, tax forms, and other papers I needed for work. I'd been so focused on getting out of the house that I hadn't double-checked the small drawer where I usually kept those things. So, with my mom showing up at my school, I told a couple of my co-workers about everything that had been going on. They didn't hesitate to step up and offer their help. "Let us know when you're ready to grab the rest of your stuff," Alicia said, handing me her spare car keys. "We'll make it quick." So, a few days later, Alicia and another co-worker, Maria, came with me to my parents' house to collect the rest of my things. I thought I was ready for whatever nonsense they might try to pull, but I underestimated just how low they were willing to go. When we got to my room, it was unrecognizable. Martha had moved more of her stuff in, mixing it with mine like some kind of territorial takeover. Clothes that weren't mine were shoved into my dresser, random baby items were piled on my desk, and my nightstand had been completely emptied and filled with her things. "What's going on here?" I muttered. More to myself than anyone else. Martha appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee and looking entirely unbothered. "Oh hey," she said casually, like nothing had happened. "I guess some of my stuff got mixed in. It's hard to tell what's yours and what's mine at this point." I stared at her, trying to process the audacity of her words. "You mean the stuff that was in my room, where I've been living for years?" She shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. Well, you already left, so what does it matter? It was clear she'd done this on purpose, hoping to make things more difficult for me. But what she didn't know was that I'd anticipated this exact scenario. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved pictures of my room from before she started moving in. I already have photos of everything, I said, holding the screen up so she could see, and I made a list of all my stuff, down to the serial numbers on my electronics. Martha's face twisted in frustration, but before she could respond, Mom and Dad showed up. What's going on? Dad demanded. What are you doing in here? He asked in fury. I came to grab some stuff I forgot, but Martha is claiming she can't tell what's hers and what's mine, I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. But I have documentation for everything I own. Dad's expression darkened. If you take anything that doesn't belong to you, I'll call the police. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Go ahead, I said. We can also talk to them about the legality of you entering my room without notice and tampering with my belongings. That shut him up. Alicia and Maria stepped in, helping me sort through the mess. Martha tried to argue when I picked up my laptop, claiming it was hers, but all I had to do was pull up the purchase receipt and a photo of the serial number. The more she realized her plan wasn't going to work, the angrier she got. This is so unfair, she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. You're stealing from a pregnant woman. I turned to her, finally fed up. The only person trying to steal anything here is you, I said firmly. Just like you've been trying to steal my time and my freedom by expecting me to be your unpaid nanny, not anymore. And with that, I got into Alicia's car and didn't look back. Now, all that was 6 months ago. Martha had the baby, and as I predicted, things are falling apart. My parents are now stuck providing the childcare they tried to dump on me, all while working their full-time jobs. They're exhausted and overwhelmed. According to the few family members who still speak to me, Martha hasn't even tried to find a job. She claims she's too stressed to work, which is probably true considering she spends most of her time scrolling on her phone and ignoring her responsibilities. She's still living in my parents' house, now with a crying infant and an unfinished basement renovation that's draining their retirement savings. I've heard they've made several attempts to contact me since I left. First, there were angry texts about how ungrateful I was. When that didn't work, they switched to guilt trips about how much the baby needed me. The latest strategy has been sending photos of my niece with captions like, "Don't you want to meet your only niece?" and "She needs her aunt in her life." I've blocked them all on social media and set up email filters to avoid their messages. A few family members who understand my position have kept me in the loop, but I've made it clear I'm not interested in rebuilding relationships until my parents and Martha acknowledge their behavior and make real changes. Ironically, if they had just respected my boundaries and asked for occasional babysitting help like normal people, I probably would have agreed. I love kids, and I wouldn't have minded helping out sometimes. But their attempt to trap me into full-time childcare while disregarding my space and autonomy destroyed any chance of that happening. And yeah, that's my story. What I realized from all this mess is that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their destructive behaviors.